Chapter 271. An iron-gray ray of light cut through Luo Xian's defense and swept past her in an instant. Blood spurted out from under her white dress. Luo Xian knelt on the ground and looked down at the cut on her chest in confusion. Then, Heaven City Square heard the sound of his body shattering one after another. It was as if he had been destroyed by a thunderbolt. Every joint and every muscle in his body was crying out in pain. She was heavily injured. With just one punch, he was completely defeated. If he wasn't a fourth-order ascendant, he might have been crushed to pieces by this punch, right? But now, the outcome had been decided. "I'm sorry, little girl. I won unfairly, but I have to live." He coughed violently and spat out his broken organs. No longer looking at Luo Xian, who had been cut in half by Tengu, he staggered forward and stumbled to the medicine bottle. He reached out and wanted to pick up the medicine bottle. Then he froze in place. He heard a curious voice behind him. "I've never seen this swordsmanship before. Is it the new Inryu? No, if it's Tengu, it should be the Tengu from Saddle Horse Mountain." No wonder. He turned around stiffly and saw Luo Xian, whose back was facing him, slowly climb up from the ground. She should have been cut in half at the waist, but she looked unharmed. Only a terrible cut appeared under her broken white dress. It was so deep that bone could be seen, and blood was flowing out. When she spoke, her tone was full of realization. It was as if she had gained knowledge and learned new skills. Heaven City Square couldn't believe it. It was only a light injury. She had clearly hit. "How did you?" He turned around and stared at Luo Xian's posture. "What was that move just now? Is it this?" Luo Xian thought for a moment, and the outline of her body floated and solidified again. The whole world became a low-quality DVD, and it froze just now. Thus, many unimportant details and the plot were lightly skimmed over, including the sure-kill attack just now. Just by relying on the use of her body, it was close to reaching the realm of miracles. This should be considered used steps, but it's a technique I just figured out a few days ago. She spread out her hands and showed off her skills to her opponent without holding anything back. "Look, it's like this. When the opponent attacks, take a step to the left and a step to the right. When the knife is not paying attention, you can dodge it." He could clearly understand every single word, but when they were put together, it became absurd and strange. Was that really a skill that could be achieved by the physical body? Was that really a creation that could be imagined by humans? What kind of monster would be able to create such a scene so casually? Luo Xian had no idea how terrifying this talent was. After she finished explaining, she smiled helplessly. "It's a pity that I'm still not very proficient. I thought I was really going to die just now. But now that I've learned that move of yours, I shouldn't be injured anymore, right?" In the dead silence, Heaven City Square felt a dry cough in their throats, making it difficult for them to breathe. He didn't know why, but his originally calm heart couldn't stop itself from trembling. His fingers twitched and twitched again, uncontrollably. "Be more serious." Luo Xian looked at him. "You know how to walk." He took a step forward and stood still. Then his eyes widened. Suppressing the uneasiness in his heart, he launched an attack. That was when he heard Luo Xian whispering, "Tang bamboo." Luo Xian's hand chopped down in the shape of a tang bamboo. Luo Xian shook her head. "Kasaya slash." Then Heaven City Square executed the Kasaya slash. Like a marionette, he felt a chill run down his spine, as though he had been plunged into an ice cave. He roared, turned around, and attacked fiercely. "Catch Yanfei." Luo Xian muttered under her breath. Her attacks all missed. However, a fourth-order divine master was still a fourth-order divine master. The wind howled, and a terrifying aura spread out. Like a hot knife through butter, Yen Fei's face and arms were torn apart. She was severely injured, but Luo Xian's expression was exceptionally dissatisfied. She looked at him with disappointment. "Is that all you've got?" She stepped forward. "Use steps. Heavens fall." There was a loud bang. Crow Tengu staggered back. His remaining wing was completely torn apart, and he hissed tragically. Luo Xian stepped forward again. She ignored Crow Tengu's countless feathers and allowed them to tear her body apart. Then she threw another punch. Earth collapse. The earth collapsed and cracked, starting from Crow Tengu's feet and spreading in all directions. The terrifying power caused blood to seep out of every pore of Heaven City Square. It was as though they were playing. Even though Heaven City Square's counterattack had broken one of her arms, she still smiled casually. "You should be the kind of person who has a strong foundation and can even achieve a breakthrough in battle, right? Don't be disheartened. Please work harder, Mr. Heaven City Square." She stared at Tengu's gradually pale face and pleaded expectantly. "Before you or I die, try to leave behind some beautiful memories. So, please do your best to kill me." Heaven City Square said nothing. He had been swallowed up by the pleasant darkness in her eyes. The chill was like a tide, freezing his consciousness. As the essence hidden in the darkness revealed its ferocious outline, he couldn't help but tremble in despair. He couldn't restrain himself. What kind of monster is this? He didn't know. It was as though a viscous darkness had risen from the woman's thin body, slowly swallowing him, covering him inch by inch, chewing him up, and sinking into the final madness in the pain of being torn to shreds. The sound of bones breaking rang out, followed by the sound of internal organs shattering, and even the sound of teeth grinding and blood sucking reverberated in his ears. For some reason, he suddenly remembered a low melody that he had heard somewhere before. It was so gentle and so peaceful. Perhaps today was a good day to die. He closed his eyes numbly. Crow Tengu had welcomed death. When the roar came to an end, the screams and wails came to an abrupt end. The flying dust and ashes rustled down. In the midst of the devastation, only a broken figure slowly walked out. She was almost in pieces. Her white dress was full of cracks, and one of her eyes was blind. Both of her arms were broken, and one of her calves was crushed to pieces. Yet there was still a faint smile on her face. The final winner appeared in front of all the audience. However, there was no cheering in the venue, not even warm applause. There was only dead silence, a suffocating silence. Everyone's eyes were stung by the gentle smile on the screen. When they realized what that blissful smile represented, everyone subconsciously held their breaths. They could feel fear. They couldn't help but tremble. Unbelievable. The Harkin let out a long sigh. It wasn't clear whether it was in awe or amazement. Is this what a genius is like? In front of the television, the old man holding the cup of protein powder indifferently lowered his eyes. Genius? Perhaps. Perhaps the talent she possessed had long surpassed the scope of ordinary people's understanding. But was this excessive talent the love of fate, or was it a curse? In the silence, only the sound of the phone beside him could be heard. Zhu Hongqin's name appeared on the screen. The old man calmly picked up the phone. "I saw it." After a long period of silence, a tired voice came from the other end of the phone. "Sorry." "There's nothing to be sorry about. This isn't anyone's fault. It's just that you misunderstood her nature and had high hopes for her," Elder Luo said indifferently. Elder Luo faintly said, "I'm still looking forward to her returning to human life." Zhu Hongqin fell silent for a long time before saying, "I'll take care of it." "This isn't something you can take care of, nor is it something you should care about." Elder Luo shook his head. "Don't worry, I can take care of it. Is there no other way? There isn't, the old man asked. Apart from killing her, how else can we free her? After a long period of silence, the call was cut off. The old man put down the phone and leaned back in his chair, staring at the smiling face on the screen. After a long time, he closed his eyes. In the end, it has to be like this. He chuckled softly. He didn't know if he was proud of the bad karma he had planted, or if he was mocking his own naivety. 20 years ago, when he knew that he had reached the end of his path, it didn't take long for him to accept this result that might have been a bolt out of the blue for others. He was so calm that even he was afraid of it. Apart from that, he had only made a wish. He wished that someone could inherit everything he had, that someone could surpass him, and that someone could surpass him. Later, he met a woman in hell. 2 years later, he opened the door and saw the swaddling clothes on the steps. From that day on, he knew that his wish had come true. The baby that appeared in front of his door grew strong and fast. Even if he was not good at raising children, he still stubbornly survived his rough cultivation method. Then he showed his unbelievable talent. Once upon a time, he was overjoyed by the appearance of this talent. When did he start to realize how abnormal this talent was? Too many abnormalities were ignored by him, and the distorted nature was covered by this unprecedented talent, until one day, when he crossed the cordon and walked into the messy classroom, he saw the 6-year-old Luo Xian. The lonely girl stood among the corpses of her classmates, carefully looking at the twisted face of her teacher before he died. She turned her head blankly and looked at her father. "Father, did you come to take me home?" "Why did you kill them, Xiaoxian?" He squatted down and stared into his daughter's eyes. Then he saw the happy smile on her face that came from the bottom of her heart. The teacher said that he would take us to play a game. A game. From that moment on, he realized where the abnormality in this child came from. Only in the death of something would she be able to obtain happiness. She could only feel happiness when she killed something. She could only feel the so-called love when she was about to be killed. The abyss had indeed fulfilled his wish, fulfilling his prayer without question. In the way that he wished, the abyss had granted him far too much. This blessing was far too generous. It was too generous for the human world to bear. From that day on, he did not teach Luo Xian anything, but he still could not stop her from growing up day by day, and her wish came true day by day, just like the monsters who came to the human world. No matter how delicate her appearance was, it could not hide the abnormality in her soul. She had never gained any growth or understanding from her life as a human being. It was better to say that everything about ordinary people was a profound role-playing game for her, the shackles and shackles of a cage. One day, this short childhood would come to an end. She would respond to the call of the abyss, return to hell, abandon the human shell, and become a monster that even she feared. But it was not now, nor was it today. The old man slowly raised his head and stared at the blank scroll on the wall. He found the answer that he already knew in his heart from nothingness. Perhaps from the beginning, this hypocritical family game should not have started. Love was too extravagant for people like them. Fortunately, he still had time to write the ending for this game. Huaishur woke up from his trance. The manuscript in front of him silently turned into a ray of light. As if it had completed its task, it flew away after 2 rounds. Then, the cello in his arms also disappeared into the air. In the spectator stands, the flames in the eye sockets of the skeleton had been extinguished at some point in time. But for some reason, it felt like there was still a peaceful smile on its face. Huaishur was still immersed in the wonderful feeling just now. In the short and peaceful melody, he seemed to have obtained relief and peace. He flew in the sky without any worries, looking at the turmoil and struggle in the distance. He quietly stared at everything that had nothing to do with him. He saw those insignificant deaths fly into the sky and disappear into the dark world behind the dark clouds. In just a few minutes, it felt like 3 or 4 days. All of his origin substance had been used up. He almost collapsed. Then he mysteriously understood something. When he habitually flipped open the book, he found that his cello performance, which had been dormant for a long time, had increased by a level. This was an unexpected surprise. But what made him even more confused was that the damned skill premonition of death had also inexplicably jumped from LV1 to LV2. What happened? He held the Book of Destiny and looked it over and over again, completely confused. Chapter 272. What on earth did I do? Just as Huaishir was puzzled by the Book of Destiny, he heard a knock on the door of the art museum. Although it was far away, the knocking seemed to echo in his ears. Only now did he realize that the entire art museum seemed to appear in Huaishir's perception. Every detail and change was vivid in his mind. As long as he thought about it, all kinds of things in the storage room would appear in his hands. The door could be easily opened and locked. It was like a fortress. Before Old Skeleton died, he handed over the control of the art museum to him. Unfortunately, all the things were basically taken away by the stingy Music Association. Only some miscellaneous daily necessities were left, and there was an exchange list. It was filled with a row of names of musicians that blinded Huaishir's eyes, as well as their essence manuscripts, as well as various relic-level instruments from the border, and the exchange price that blinded Huaishir's eyes. The starting price of source crystals was more than 10 pieces. In other words, if he wanted to exchange for East Summer dollars, even at the lowest exchange rate, the cheapest was more than 20 million. 20 million? Am I crazy? 20 million for an original manuscript, and I can only read it once. Huaishir casually put the exchange list into his pocket and walked in the direction of the door. When he opened the door, he saw the backpacker waiting outside. Mask, hood, gloves, sunglasses, and covered in a robe, not revealing any skin. He looked extremely mysterious. "Yo!" The visitor waved at him rather indifferently. "Excuse me, are you Huaishir?" Huaishir thought for a long time and couldn't remember where he had seen such a mysterious person. "Who are you?" "Number 2, I thought you heard about me from others." The mysterious person shrugged, which finally made Huaishir remember the mysterious person who was ranked above him. He seemed to be a member of the Astronomy Association, but he hadn't revealed his identity since the beginning of the competition. At this moment, he suddenly came, which made Huaishir a little confused. "Excuse me, what can I do for you?" The mysterious man shrugged and pointed behind the door. "Can we talk inside? I traversed the entire city to find this place. It would be best if I could rest for a while." "You're not polite at all." Huaishir hesitated for a moment before opening the door and turning sideways. "Although this isn't my place, please," the mysterious man swaggered in, as if he was not worried about Huaishir's trap. He passed through the luxurious hall and marveled at the gorgeous decorations on the corridor walls. As expected of the Hell Music Association, this place is really big. It's rich and overbearing. The mysterious man heaved a long sigh. "Our place can't be compared at all. They don't even provide us with food. When we sleep, we can only sleep on the recliner used to wash our guests' hair. It's so miserable. Is it that hard?" Huaishir was stunned and immediately became curious. "You are—" The mysterious man chuckled and took out a rolled leather belt from his pocket. With a flick of his hand, a row of scissors and combs of various colors were revealed from the unrolled leather belt. There was also a faint smell of hair stubble and ointment. Abyss Styling Association. The mysterious man shrugged. "Simply put, it's a haircut and a bloodletting treatment at the same time, right, just call me Tony. Huaishi's expression twitched. The infernal realm really had all kinds of things. Not only did he say that there was a barber association, he even copied teacher Tony's name. Wasn't that a bit perfunctory? Anyway, names are just a form of address. Tony waved his hand casually. If you want, you can call me Kevin or Alan. Just call me Tony. Huaishi led the way in front and suddenly had a bold idea. He looked back at Tony's backpack with tools and pinched his chin. Isn't that, as if knowing what he was thinking, Tony waved his hand and refused. Your hairstyle is very good. You don't have to cut it. There's nothing to cut. Huaishi was speechless for a while. He had thought that the barber in hell would have a way to cut his hair that was a bit too long. Even if he didn't ask for a haircut, it would be fine to cut it back to its original appearance. If it's just a simple haircut, I can do it, but there's no need. Tony explained. The so-called haircut and beauty treatment is to enhance the existence of beauty to the greatest extent. Now, your posture is a pure extension of the stigmata. It can be said to be a perfect reflection of the miracle in the human body. There's no need for any modification. If I cut your hair forcibly, it may also affect the operation of the stigmata itself. Huaishi was puzzled. It's just a haircut, right? Tony gave him a strange look. What's wrong? No, you probably don't know. After sitting down in the lounge, he put down his backpack and slumped on the chair. To be honest, a newcomer like you who became a calamity musician and an official culinary demon is really something. Have you been leveling up in the 10-mile slope before? What's the 10-mile slope? Ahem, it's a joke in the archaeological team. Please don't mind it. After pondering for a moment, Tony said seriously, the so-called stylist pursues the maximum degree of modification to the customer's characteristics and beauty. Whether it's shaving or dyeing hair, they're just minor details. At the end of the day, everything is to show the most intuitive beauty. Can you understand? Are you trying to say that sissies are also beautiful? Huaishi's face twitched. Don't the mountain ghosts have this kind of dark beauty? Tony's words stunned Huaishi. The first thought that came to his mind was, why does everyone know that I'm a celestial genealogy? How can I be a snitch if this continues? Tony opened his hand, and frost instantly condensed and rose, turning into a lifelike bust of Huaishi. Celestial genealogy, Dusk Road, Grade 3, Frost Giant. To be honest, there aren't many celestial genealogy sublimators now. When I saw you, I was shocked. Don't tell me you've been cheated by the archaeological team's interest-free loan. Those guys are thinking of ways to pull newcomers into celestial genealogy every day in order to open up the abyss. You can say that I've been cheated and pulled into a pirate ship. Huaishi shrugged helplessly. Then he immediately reacted, and his eyes lit up. Wait, does the archaeological team have interest-free loans? Do you still remember to apply now? It's only for new sublimators before grade 1. It's too late for you to take advantage of it now. Tony chuckled, as if he was looking at Huaishi. Soon, the eyes behind the sunglasses softened slightly. Where were we just now? Barber. Yes, barber. Tony spread out his hands and continued. To put it simply, this job is to better reflect the beauty of the miracle on the sublimator, and at the same time to correct some phenomena caused by the low compatibility between the sublimator and the stigmata, such as beastification or pathological changes. Huaishi was stunned for a long time, and then he gasped. The barber in the abyss could even correct and modify the stigmata. Wasn't this a little too ridiculous? After all, since a long time ago, the barbers of Rome were known for bloodletting therapy and surgery. These are quite advanced skills. At best, my ability can only remove some superficial lesions. Tony said slowly, now you understand, right? The guilds that can register in the graveyard of the returnless are famous for their unique skills and abilities. For example, the Infernal Music Association's Soul Adjustment and Healing Movements, the Muse Club's Portrait Inheritance Scroll and Painting Summoning Spell, and needless to say, the Culinary Tournament. From the poison configuration to the smelting of dark elemental, to the various magical recipes that are close to alchemy, there are simply endless secret recipes. In this regard, the celestial genealogy has a natural advantage, and it's easier to get their approval. If you still have the energy, you can try more. In this regard, will astronomy stop you? Huaisher nodded. Although he did not fully understand, it was a good thing anyway, not knowing whether it was to prove his sincerity or simply not care. After the mysterious man called Tony gave so much information, Huaisher was embarrassed to maintain his original vigilance. The sound of boiling water rang out, breaking the awkward silence between the two. Huaisher reached out and fished out a teapot and 2 teacups. Finally, after rummaging in the storeroom for a long time, he looked up and asked, "Is only black tea okay?" "It's okay." Thus, the tea leaves accurately fell into the teapot, and the boiling water poured in. After Huaisher added sugar and milk, which was rather rare and infernal, he poured a large cup for Tony and placed it in front of him. Then, he stared at his face that was tightly covered. He wanted to know how this guy would drink it. Then, he saw Tony take off his sunglasses and mask, and a huge horse face suddenly jumped out from under the mask, giving Huaisher a fright. This bastard even wore a rather huge plastic head cover under the mask. Just like that, in front of Huaisher, he raised his head and poured the tea into the horse's mouth. Ignoring the tea spilling all over his body, he put down the teacup, shook his limp horse face, and pretended to finish drinking. "Thank you for your hospitality." For some reason, Huaisher felt that the horse face had a smug smile on it. After drinking the tea and sitting down, Huaisher did not want to talk to this mysterious guy anymore, so he asked straightforwardly, "So, are you here on behalf of the Astronomy Association?" "Who said I'm from the Astronomy Association? Don't talk nonsense." Tony lied through his teeth and looked like he would never admit it. "I'm just a contestant who happened to pass by." "Okay." Huaisher's face twitched. "What's the matter?" "Then just say it." He said straightforwardly, "I'm going to leave." Chapter 273. Huaisher was dumbfounded. Next, this place will become a battle between Dongxia and Ingzhou. "No, Dongxia and Ingzhou," Tony said. "With my status, it's not appropriate for me to stay here." "You're still saying you're not from the Astronomy Association." "I'm just saying that it's not appropriate for me to stay here. Don't spout nonsense." Tony's horse face was filled with innocence. "You have to be responsible for what you say. You just won't admit it, right?" Huaisher thought for a moment, then asked, "I have to leave too?" "You're not on the Astronomy Association's list of participants. You're not representing the Astronomy Association. You said you're from the Astronomy Association. Did you bring your credentials?" "No, that's right." Tony shrugged. "It's up to you whether you want to leave or stay. However, for a low-level member like you, this opportunity is quite rare. It's best if you can grasp it. There's no need to think too much about it. So, why did you come looking for me? Aren't I going to say it now? Don't keep interrupting me, okay? Fine. Continue." Huaisher picked up his teacup and glanced at Tony. He wanted to see what Tony had come here for. Originally, in my estimation, there were only a few favorites to win this competition. Yi Shueya, Wan Qingyi, White Five, Nanzhou Kenichi. But now, everyone has left, and the unlucky ones have left. There are only 3 or 4 left. Now, Yi Shueya has already advanced. I most likely won't be able to beat him. Even if I stay, I can only be number 2. However, I haven't fought with you yet." He paused for a moment, and a trace of anticipation appeared in his eyes. So, before you leave, can you spar with me? So you're here to look for a fight. Huh? You won't admit that you're from the Astronomy Association. Because of this, Huaishi's expression twitched. Inconvenient. As if he could see that Su Chen's origin substance was empty, Tony waved his hand. It's fine. Another method is fine. As he spoke, he took out a deck of poker cards and shuffled them skillfully. Countless cards jumped around in the hands of a horse-headed man, giving people a strange feeling. Huaishi shook his head. Sorry, I won't. A mischievous smile appeared on the horse's face, as if he had expected this. It doesn't matter. Let's draw and see who's bigger. What are you after? You ran over to my side before you left just to draw cards with me? As a reward for fulfilling my unreasonable request. He suddenly pulled out a box from his pocket and placed it on the table. Since I won't be able to use it after I leave, how about this? When the box was opened, there was an old round fan inside. The surface of the fan was already badly damaged. The ribs of the fan were blackened, and there were traces of insects eating away at them. The white round fan looked dim and worn out, as if it was tattered. Tony said, If I'm not wrong, it should be used in the next game. It's up to you whether to keep it or throw it to the Social Security Bureau. Promise him. Crow's voice sounded in his ear. With this thing, you can sneak into the core of the Central District, the Shadow Region. Huaishi was puzzled. Why would I sneak in there when I have nothing better to do? There's something there that's related to your advancement. Tell me if you want to go or not. I promise you. Huaishi instantly grabbed the box and stuffed it into his arms, as if the person who was hesitating and unwilling just now wasn't him. Tony's horse face froze for a moment. He didn't expect Huaishi to bend over for 5 buckets of rice so smoothly and freely. It took him a long time to catch his breath. If he had known, he wouldn't have said so much. So, each of us will draw a card and compete, right? Huaishi moved his chair forward a little. Hurry up, hurry up. Win or lose, he got what he wanted anyway. He didn't lose anything. It's probably a little more particular. Tony pondered for a moment and suggested, each of us will draw 5 cards, and then choose the flip of one of them in each round. 2 out of 3 wins. How about that? Huaishi was puzzled. That's simple. Yes. A smile appeared on the horse face. It's that simple. At that moment, in Tony's hand, countless cards suddenly rose into the air. The snow-white pieces of paper, with complicated patterns on their backs, flew in all directions as if they had grown wings. Huaishi was stunned for a moment, and then he saw the joy in Tony's eyes. It was clearly a flash of lightning, but his words rang in his ears unhurriedly. If you don't hurry up, the cards will fly away. Lightning reflex, activate. Huaishi suddenly reached out and grabbed the cards flying in front of him. But for some reason, in that almost frozen moment, he couldn't even see the face of a card. Layers upon layers of poker cards danced in the air, perfectly blocking each other's colors and points, making it impossible for Huaishi to make a move. But immediately afterwards, the fluttering colors suddenly changed, transforming into dozens of small birds that mixed together in a chaotic mess. Furthermore, they were slippery, and no matter how fast Huaishi moved, she was unable to touch them. Seeing his stunned expression, Tony's smile became even more delighted. When Huaishi stopped, 5 birds suddenly landed in front of him and silently turned into 5 cards on the table. Apart from the 5 cards that also landed in front of Tony, all the other cards instantly disappeared. What was that just now? Huaishi asked. It's a skill that I learned from a fortune teller at the borders of Gilsey. Impressive, right? It's very pretentious when it's bluffing, but it's not worth mentioning once it's exposed. Please don't mind it. He lowered his head and looked at the cards in front of Huaishi. Can we begin? Comparing size? Was it just purely a comparison of size? Huaishe frowned. He reached out and casually flipped open a card with an expressionless face. 10 of hearts. The first card is a 10, rich foundation. Tony clicked his tongue and sighed. He followed closely behind and flipped open his card. 7 of black. Neither big nor small, neither good nor bad. He lost. Then came the second round. Huaishe reached out and flipped open another card. Ace of hearts. The smallest point. It seems that the current development is a little difficult. I need to work harder. If I stay where I am, I'm afraid I'll fall into a difficult situation. After Tony finished speaking, he flipped open his card. 7 of red. It was still neither big nor small, neither good nor bad. He won the second round. In other words, the final round will determine the winner? Tony nodded and sighed. He flipped open one of his remaining 3 cards. 7 of clubs. 3 7-points in a row. A coincidence? Or was it some kind of inevitable result? Huaishe hesitated for a long time. He looked down at his last 3 cards and chose 1 out of 3. He reached out and flipped open a card. Queen of hearts. Best of 3. Huaishe won. Tony was silent and did not speak. His hoarse face seemed to be full of confusion. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. After a long, long time, he coughed twice and laughed awkwardly. Aya, the newcomers nowadays are really scary. He nodded and sighed. They have a bright future. After getting through the current predicament, the future is promising. What was all this about? Huaishe was still confused, but he saw Tony put on his mask and sunglasses again. He got up and said goodbye as if he was ready to run away. Then, let's say goodbye, Mr. Huaishe. As he spoke, he reached out and shook hands with Huaishe. I wish you a good ranking. He left just like that. After inexplicably coming to compete, he turned around and left. What was he after? It was just a little joke. I hope you don't mind. At the entrance of the art museum, Tony seemed to have a smile on his face. He raised his hand and said goodbye to Huaishe. I hope we can meet again, somewhere else next time. He picked up his backpack and jumped into a huge steel hand that suddenly stretched out in the void. Then he disappeared. He came strangely and left abruptly. It was simply inexplicable. Huaishe stared at the door for a long time with a blank expression. Yes, it's me. In the cockpit of the huge robot, Tony, who was walking to the exit area, answered a call from the outside world. The investigation of the newcomer, Huaishe, has been completed. What's the result? He doesn't look like a child with ulterior motives. Instead, he's so straightforward that it's a little surprising, Tony said indifferently. The divination result is very normal. Whether it's the past, the future, or the present, it's all hearts. There's no spade that represents the golden dawn. Maybe he's a successor nurtured by some old seniors who still exist in the utopia. You know, those old men have always disliked the way the directorate operates, so it's normal for them to hide things from us. The person on the other end of the phone pondered for a moment and asked, is there a possibility of him being absorbed? Tony smiled. It's not a problem to absorb him. Young people are quite gullible. At most, we'll just spend more money. The treatment of the technical department has always been good. But the question is, who will absorb who in the end? This is the result of the divination. In the Iron Foundry Legion, the one with the highest achievements is you, boss. Black 10. Guess what his number is? Without waiting for the other party to guess, Tony said straightforwardly, Q of hearts. The person on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time. Then he sucked in a breath of cold air. Oh my God, then wouldn't this little bastard be able to enter the central decision-making room in the future? It's just a possibility. Big brother. Think about his background. Maybe he's an agent nurtured by some old monster. Tony pinched the horse's nose and said in an envious and helpless tone, "How can we raise a leviathan in this broken fish pond? Aren't you afraid that he'll become the next Rasputin? Please don't suddenly give me a task like investigating a powerful dragon next time, okay? I was so scared just now that I almost had a heart attack." Pretend I didn't ask. The sigh on the other end of the phone turned into a pain in the ass. "Write me a report later. Remember to cut out this part. I won't change it. I'll submit it directly." After a short silence, the two people on the other end of the phone sighed at the same time. Life is getting harder and harder. Chapter 274. Late at night, an ox cart quietly traveled on a desolate street. "What's that?" In the ox cart, Huaisha looked at Crow, dumbfounded. "Divination? What divination? Isn't it a poker game?" "That's right. Maybe it's a relic from the border that was used in other places." Crow said indifferently, "It's just an ordinary background check. There are too many ways, although it's impossible to be too detailed. With the foundation of the Astronomy Society, there shouldn't be any mistakes." "Then why are they investigating me?" Huaisha was even more dumbfounded. He couldn't figure out why the Astronomy Society would inexplicably investigate a weak, innocent, and pitiful person like him. Crow coughed twice and looked away. "Originally, there was no need to be so detailed to the level of every low-level officer, but you've been jumping around too much recently, and your performance is too scary. Moreover, it's celestial genealogy. It's impossible not to investigate you. They're just taking precautions. Who do you think caused all of this?" When he heard that the KGB had come to his door, drank his black tea, played poker with him, and left without him knowing, Huaisha was suddenly flustered. He glared at Crow. "And who said that my stigmata is very hidden? The premise of being hidden is not to be placed under a spotlight with a magnifying glass, pixel by pixel." Crow sighed. "I'm guessing that all of your dual videos and information have already been placed on countless people's tables. Those who are more serious will even give you a 30,000-word analysis report. After all, there are some old guys who can't fight and can't do work, but their eyes are deadly sharp. They can see through your little secret with just a glance. Then what should I do? Do what you have to do. Live as usual, eat as usual, and play as usual. You didn't commit any crimes. You're just good at fighting. What are you afraid of?" Crow glanced at him calmly and said, "If you ask me, your performance was perfect. You played the part of a lucky fool who doesn't know anything. Sai, this is your true character. Perhaps you are the type who can act like yourself no matter what you do. Besides, with the Book of Destiny in hand, who can calculate your foundation? Is it that powerful?" Huaisha was skeptical. Why else would it be called the Book of Destiny? Life is not easy. Crow sighed. She glanced at her silly boy and suddenly felt a little guilty. Don't worry. No matter who it is, no matter what method they use, no matter what technique they use, as long as the Book of Destiny is in your hands, they will only be able to see your original destiny before you became a sublimator. That's right. If Huaisha had thrown this thing away when he was 9 years old, his fate might have been completely different from now. It was just as the results of the divination showed. Sufficient foundation. The road ahead is bumpy, but the future is bright. Without the interference of the Book of Destiny, his luck wouldn't have been so terrible. As long as he could live past the age of 18, his luck would immediately change. No, according to her observation, the turning point of Huaisha's fate was at the school's anniversary celebration a few months ago. According to the original fate, as long as Huaisha revealed his talent in the performance, he would immediately be favored and nurtured by the nobles, obtaining the most precious turning point. From then on, It would be unstoppable. When he was 20 years old, he relied on his own efforts to walk into Vienna's Golden Hall. There was no problem at all. He was as dreamy as the male lead of an inspirational morning drama. From then on, he was surrounded by flowers and burned with fire. Just as he had wanted, he lived a life of respect. In the end, he passed away peacefully, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. His life's contributions would be recorded in the history books, and in a few decades, he would appear as a young lady in some messy mobile game pool. Unfortunately, Huaisher didn't even go to the performance at the school's anniversary celebration that day. Instead, he committed a crime. After giving Crow a strong dose of medicine, his fate uncontrollably deviated into the trench. From then on, he was completely separated from his original fate, and the future was unpredictable. Looking at it this way, she was simply a bad person who played with the fate of a teenager. Crow inexplicably felt a little guilty. After awkwardly coughing twice, she maintained her original reliable and calm sisterly tone. Don't worry, the background check will be a mess sooner or later. It's better to do it sooner rather than later. After this, you'll be considered one of us, and the treatment will immediately be different. Maybe you'll even get a promotion and a raise. Then how do I explain the celestial genealogies stigmata? Huaisher frowned and pondered. Are you stupid? The Red Gloves has been dead for so long. Can't you just push the blame to him? Little Crow's lesson of teaching children bad things started again. Anyway, Green Sun's fault doesn't make any difference. You can say that you got a book from him and inexplicably became a ghost. Anyway, there are many inheritances similar to celestial genealogy every year, and you're not the only one. Who has nothing better to do than to think that this kid has the celestial genealogy's source code in his hands? Huaisher was still not at ease. What if someone thinks of it? Then you have to say it, and someone has to believe it. Crow looked at him as if she was looking at an idiot. Do you look like you're the kind of person who can pick up a divine weapon from a grocery store and win over all the girls with a single move of your tiger body and even spend a fortune in an auction? Huaisher felt ashamed of his inferiority. Do a good job as a cowherd. This is a very promising job. She patted Huaisher's shoulder and turned into the shadows. In the silent darkness, other than the rumbling sound of the ox cart moving forward, the sound of clappers suddenly came from the front. Hey, it's about to start. Cheer up, Crow reminded in a low voice, and the illusory silhouette went back into the key ring and disappeared, leaving Huaisher kneeling in the carriage alone. He felt his limbs stiffen. Around him, outside the carriage, there was a constant flow of dangerous aura. The premonition of death constantly emerged in his heart. It reminded him that this was no longer within the range of the Shinua framework, but a dangerous area where one wrong step could lead to death. The core of the central district of Yamatai, the palace shrouded in eternal darkness, the essence of the evil that appeared in the terrifying abyss, the gathering place of the superior, the place where the real ruler slept. It could be said to be a place like the palace, if not for Crow's strong encouragement and that round fan. Huaisher would not dare to come here even if he had 100,000 guts. In the dead silence, only the rumbling of the ox cart wheels and the faint clappers in the distance could be heard. It sounded like a night watchman patrolling the night, but mixed with the mournful cries of night owls. Huaisher carefully raised his finger and lifted the curtain of the ox cart by a sliver, peeking at the scene in the fog. It was as if time was turning back. As the ox cart moved forward, the deeper it went, the more ancient it became. The tall buildings disappeared, and in their place were layers of ancient illusions constantly changing under the reflection of the fog. Occasionally, a gust of wind would blow, and the fog would thin, revealing a person's appearance, but it was fleeting. It could be an ancient and gloomy temple or a mirage-like jade palace, or a brightly lit wine tavern. A woman's gentle singing voice came from within, and in the darkness, a pair of green eyes lit up, staring at Huaisher's face through the fog. Huaisher immediately let go. The curtain fell, isolating the inside from the outside. In the silence, only his violent breathing could be heard. He raised his hand to touch his face, and felt the traces of cracks. As he pulled, a pitch-black abyss precipitate was pulled out from the cracks on his face, and the wound quickly healed, returning to its original state. It was just a glance from him. Now, Huaisher was wearing a strange black hat and a set of hunting clothes that he bought from a shop in Yamatai. This set of seemingly ordinary hunting clothes had already cost all of Huaisher's gold coins. This was with the title of Paradise Prince. If he did not have this title, the old man in the shop would not have cared about him at all. After looking at Huaisher harshly, the old man finally instructed him, "If you are going to have an audience, do not be impolite." Then he sent Huaisher out of the door and closed the door. Huaisher was completely dumbfounded, and this ox cart, when Huaisher changed his clothes, holding a fan in his hand, and went out at the time arranged by Crow, came out from the thick fog, as if it had been waiting there for a long time. Once Huaisher got on the cart, it moved on its own. It brought him into the fog, passing through countless checkpoints, and went straight to the core. It was as if a cheat had been turned on. Remember, you are playing the role of a minister going to the imperial palace to participate in a poetry gathering. Do not expose yourself. Crow warned. Once you enter, if you want to come out alive, it will depend on your luck. Wealth comes from danger. Whether you can earn a few small tokens back or not, it will depend on whether you can live up to expectations. With the small tokens waiting in front, Huaisher completely ignored the increasingly serious premonition of death and summoned courage from who knows where. But he was still frozen by the cold, and his whole body felt stiff. The power of the divine mark was suppressed. The more he went forward, the weaker he became. He felt that he was gradually being beaten back to his original state. The celestial genealogy that had always been successful in the past was also useless here, even if he was regarded as one of them, but there were still different ranks among them. Huaisher, as a lowly commoner, was able to get a ticket to the poetry gathering. If he was seen to be impolite, even the gods would not be able to save him. As the ox cart moved forward in silence, there were only screams from time to time in the depths of the fog. Huaisher suddenly heard the sound of wheels in front and behind. Like a convoy, more than a dozen ox carts lined up, moving forward step by step on the desolate street, and finally stopped outside the dark city gate. In the front and back of the cart, there was a dark aura that made Huaisher's hair stand on end. He did not know what kind of monster it was. After a long time, the ox cart came to an abrupt stop. A white shadow silently appeared outside the door, holding a pale lantern in his hand. The voice was like the cry of a bird, hoarse and strange. A cold gaze through the curtain seemed to fall on Huaisher's face. "The forbidden area is in front. Please get off the cart and walk." Chapter 275. Huaisher took a deep breath, picked up her round fan, and held it in front of her face as if covering her face. She lifted the curtain with one hand, took a few steps forward, and stepped onto the footstool to get out of the car. The circular fan seemed to have a strange magic power. When it blocked in front of him, a black smoke rose and shrouded Huaisher's face. No one could see his true appearance clearly, but he could see the figure in front of him through the cracks in the circular fan. The crooked and deformed servant was dressed in white. When he raised his head to look at him, he forced a flattering smile on his ugly face. He held up the lantern and limped in front of him. "Noble, noble, please follow me. Follow me." He looked around in a flattering manner and waved enthusiastically at Huaisher. Huaisher raised his eyes and looked at the dark city gate behind him. There was also the evil spirit of Ingzhou guarding the city gate that was several meters tall. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and didn't say anything. He raised the circular fan and followed after him. A few meters in front of him was an old and hunchbacked official. He held a strange-looking ceremonial weapon in his hand, but the head that popped out from his collar was like a snake. On his face that was covered in tumors and scars, a completely disproportionate eye was opened wide and shone with a green light. He had long whiskers like a fish, and on his forehead there was a crooked antler that was broken and covered in mold and moss. As he looked left and right, an inhuman thirst leaked out from his huge eyes. Huaisha wanted to slow down and increase the distance between them, but there was a dark aura following closely behind him. It made his hair stand on end. In the passageway under the city gate, the huge door was not completely open. Instead, it was firmly guarded. There was a faint, questioning voice in front of him, and a skeleton in tattered clothes walked out crookedly. Its bones opened and closed, making a sound. Recently, there have been too many outsiders who don't know their manners. Yesterday, there was even an assassin who snuck into the forbidden grounds and incurred the wrath of the High Emperor. That's why we're conducting an investigation. I hope everyone can forgive us. Huaisha's heart sank. He heard a noise behind him. A masked figure suddenly turned around and ran. Immediately, the strange old man in front of Huaisha turned his head. His snake eyes shone, and his neck suddenly stretched out. In an instant, he flew in the air, and his bloody mouth suddenly closed. With a chilling chewing sound, he slowly retracted his mouth. Then it looked at Huaisha behind it, a trace of suspicion flashing in its ruthless snake eyes. "Sir, why are you covering your face with a fan?" Huaisha did not show any signs of abnormality. Following what Crow had taught him earlier, he raised his voice and replied, "It's caused by the cold. My face is not elegant. I'm afraid that I'll lose my bearing." The snake-faced doctor stared at him for a long time before slowly withdrawing his gaze. Huaisha finally let out a sigh of relief. Sweat poured out like water. The line of officials slowly moved forward. Soon, Huaisha saw the notice pasted on the door, and the skeleton's voice in front of him. The poetry gathering is a gathering of elegance. Naturally, there won't be such a disrespectful act as a body search. As long as everyone composes a song according to this topic, it will be considered a verification of your identity. Huaisha raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Through the cracks of the round fan, he saw the notice pasted on the door. There were only 2 large words written in thick ink. "Read thoughts." His heart sank again, and he felt cold. It was not that he was completely unprepared. Since he was going to participate in the poetry gathering, he had naturally made preparations in advance. Although it was called a poetry gathering, the poetry gathering in Ingzhou was not composed of Chinese poems. Most of the poems were composed of Ingzhou songs. There was also a lot of information available for reference. With Crow's help, he had already prepared poems for each topic in advance to perform at the poetry gathering. But he did not expect that he had to recite poems first in order to prevent the Book of Destiny in his soul from being spied on by some existence. He did not even dare to open the book now. He could only secretly flip through the notes in his sleeves while the snake-faced doctor was answering questions in front of him. But he did not expect that the old ghost in front of him, who looked so uncultured, could compose a song so quickly. He only looked at the topic of read thoughts for a few seconds before he raised his head and sang, "Shrouded in the glow of spring, as if I see cherry blossoms." I haven't seen this person's face, but he is in love. Before he finished speaking, not only the skeleton, but also the officials in front and behind him clapped enthusiastically. The sound of cheering was endless. "Good poem, good poem." The skeleton stepped aside and cupped his hands in greeting. I wish you the best in the poetry contest. His praise was not without reason. With reed thoughts as the topic, the snake-faced doctor could be said to be quick-witted. The whole poem did not contain the word yearning, but it was closely related to the main axis. It could be said to be excellent. The snake-faced doctor proudly raised his head and laughed loudly. He said that he did not dare, and went straight in. Huaishir was left standing awkwardly in the same place. The hand holding the fan trembled slightly, front, back, left, and right. All eyes fell on Huaishir from all directions. In his sleeves, his fingers were trembling madly. He had just found the relevant passage, but he had only glanced at it briefly, and had not been able to read it completely. He only hated that the old bastard in front of him was too fast. At this moment, under the gaze of everyone, Huaishir was stiff for a long time. He opened his mouth several times, and then closed it several times in embarrassment. It was only when the cold and suspicious expression in the skeleton's eyes became more and more intense that he finally shook his shoulders. Before the skeleton could speak, he took the lead and recited, "If you say you haven't seen it, you have seen it, but if you have seen it, it is as if you have not seen it." As soon as the ing-song came out, it was flat and straightforward, but it seemed to have a faint heaviness that moved people's heartstrings. The skeleton's expression became sluggish, and he listened attentively. However, he saw Huaishir take a step forward, one hand holding the fan, and the other hand raised pretentiously. He recited, "Unreasonably bitter lovesickness. Bitter lovesickness. Unreasonably bitter lovesickness." Under the gaze of everyone, Huaishir's face behind the round fan was constantly sweating. He muttered this sentence over and over again in his mouth, and his heart became more and more flustered. The last sentence, he forgot the last sentence. The more nervous he was, the more he could not remember. When he repeated the sentence, "Unreasonably bitter lovesickness," 7 or 8 times, the green light in the skeleton's eyes became more and more dangerous. However, he saw Huaishir take a step forward again and recite in a solemn voice, "If you say you haven't seen it, you've seen it, but you've seen it as if you haven't seen it." Unreasonably bitter lovesickness. At the critical moment of life and death, Huaishir suddenly had an idea and added the end of the poem, "Oh, it's over." In the silence, the skeleton, the court officials, the crow in the shadow, the evil spirits looked at each other, dumbfounded and dumbfounded. They could not understand each other at all. In short, their emotions were suddenly so complicated that it was as if someone had suddenly jumped out and tossed out, "One person is worth 2. Although there was nothing wrong with continuing the conversation, they still felt an inexplicable urge to beat him up. The skeleton was stunned for a long time, and his jaw almost fell to the ground. Although the charm of the song is not a problem, the theme and format have never been seen before. What kind of theme is this? A bunch of ignorant fellows. This is the most widespread theme in Chinese poetry." Huaishir looked up and replied with a trembling voice, 3.5 sentences. The crow in the shadow closed his eyes in despair. "What the hell, 3.5 sentences, little brother? You're finished." In the long silence, Huaishir seemed to be able to feel that the skeleton's face was getting uglier and uglier. His 3.5 sentences did not seem to be as popular as he expected. He suddenly panicked and hurriedly raised his hand and said, "Wait a minute, I still have one more." As he said, he stepped forward and recited, "Before the bed." This is Taibai's poem. The skeleton sternly interrupted Huaishir's recitation. "Could it be that your excellency is here to make fun of me? If that's the case, please don't blame me for my duty to verify your excellency's identity." Following the skeleton's command, The guards on both sides of the city gate, the two huge evil spirits in red and green, came forward, holding ghost gold sticks in their hands, opened their mouths full of fangs, and looked down at the weak, lonely, and helpless Huaishur. Until next to Huaishur, the curtain of an ox cart was lifted, and the figure of a maid softly asked, "What happened?" "Ah, Luo Yuji." The skeleton sensed that the ox cart had arrived at an unknown time, and involuntarily trembled, crawled on the ground, and respectfully kowtowed. "It's my fault. The maid unhappily interrupted his words. Her hollow face seemed to have glanced at Huaishur, and then said in a cold voice, "This is Luo Yuji's guest. Please forgive me." The skeleton's pale face seemed to be covered in cold sweat. But just now, Your Excellency was joking with you. Can't you see?" The maid asked, "Do you think that you can write the first part, but he can't write the last part?" "Yes, I'm just joking with you." Although he did not know what happened, but at least he was saved, Huaishur suddenly said in a trembling voice, "Can't you see?" As he spoke, he lowered his head to look at the notes in his sleeves and added the last sentence of the original note. He was relieved. Oh, yes, Your Excellency, Your Excellency, Your Excellency, Your Excellency." The skeleton found a way out, hurriedly moved aside, and opened the palace gate, allowing Huaishur and the ox cart beside him to drive straight into the palace. After entering the city, taking advantage of the fact that there was no one around, Huaishur gratefully bowed to the figure in the carriage. It really was a life-saving grace. In the candlelight, the silhouette that he had never seen before still did not move at all. She only waved the pipa, and a dreamy whisper sounded in his ear. "Don't worry, it's just a coincidence." She paused for a moment, and then suddenly said, "Tonight there may be unrest in the palace. Please be careful." After saying this, without waiting for Huaishur to respond, the ox cart continued to move forward. Huaishur was left in place, dumbfounded, not knowing what had happened. Soon, an attendant came up to him, respectfully, and led him through the many palace doors, shuttling through the darkness. Finally, he was led into a shockingly spacious hall. The banquet seemed to have already begun. Many strange-looking officials were drinking and making merry, and there were also evil-looking ghosts eating human flesh and drinking in large mouthfuls. It looked terrifying and noisy. Huaishur quietly found an inconspicuous place to sit down, covered his face, curled up, and looked around. The premonition of death was getting stronger. It was so strong that his vision was turning black. "I've already come in. What do I want to do?" The crow in the shadow spoke. "Wait." Chapter 276. Wait. Wait for what? Wait for death. Huaishir raised his fan and shrunk into a corner where no one paid attention to him. He trembled and then looked left and right. There was not a single thing that looked like a person sitting on either side. There seems to be the smell of someone. Maybe it's a mistake. Drink, drink. The two brightly colored Ingzhou ghosts sitting in front of Huaishir raised their wine cups and once again drank to their heart's content. Very quickly, they were intoxicated by the dance music and singing. Behind the hanging curtain, the crippled musicians played the pipa, and Kongho offering a mournful tune to the rotting officials. But as the cold wind blew, the banquet became even more lively and noisy. These are all good things. Don't waste them. Quickly eat, the crow urged. Huaishir lowered his head and looked at the plates and bowls on the table. The bowl was a mess of flesh and blood. His expression twitched. He picked up his chopsticks and picked up a few cold dishes to go with the wine. The pickled vegetables were quite refreshing. Every bite had a rich abyss of sediment that spread in the mouth, bringing a wonderful impact to the taste, especially the green beans. Every time they were chewed, they would let out a scream. The beans had faces that looked like human faces and were full of juice. His eyes lit up as he ate. His originally repulsive heart disappeared without a trace. Bring me more vegetarian dishes. Don't put any meat on them. Huaishir raised his fan and ordered the attendant kneeling next to him. Recently, I have been eating vegetarian food and praying for the emperor. It doesn't matter if my cultivation is ruined, but what if the emperor's lifespan is shortened? The attendant hurriedly kowtowed. Very quickly, the dishes on the table were all changed. They looked emerald green and very unhealthy. Just as the attendant was about to take the wine away, he was stopped by Huaishir. There's no need for that. Bring me a few more types of wine, he said solemnly. Do you know Tai Bai? He's the same as me. The more wine he drinks, the happier he gets to compose poems. When I'm happy, I'll make a poem for everyone in your family. Although the attendant couldn't hide his your King bragging expression due to his duty, he still followed Huaishir's instructions and brought over a few bottles of sake. Then, he knelt by the side and waited with his eyes wide open for this shameless fellow to compose a poem. Huaishir raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine, then picked up 2 peanuts and edamame. After chewing 2 mouthfuls, he felt a few strands of cold vitality that he had never seen before sprouting from his mouth amidst the indistinct whining. He immediately let out a long sigh of relief. Unavoidably, a wave of drunkenness overtook him. Huaishir shook his head when he saw the servant kneeling there with an expectant look. Picking up his wine cup, he let out a long sigh and took a deep breath. After brewing for a moment, he raised his head and murmured, "Ah, the horse is thin and the hooves are fat." A son stealing from his father is not considered a thief. The attendant rolled his eyes and took 2 steps back on his knees. He couldn't be bothered to pay attention to this guy who had just snuck in to join in on the fun. After folding his fan, Huaishir was stunned for a moment. He hadn't expected that he would leave before he had even finished telling the story of Grandpa Blind and Grandma Blind's sentimental love story. Forget it. You don't have that kind of fortune. Huaishir shook his head and sighed. As he wished, he became an invisible person that no one paid any attention to. He continued to lower his head and drink and eat. As for the cries in the distance, they were just an accompaniment. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Crow didn't say anything even when he asked. Huaishir waited for a long time, taking 1 sip of wine and 1 bite of food. After eating 2 plates of edamame, he still couldn't wait. He could only take out the list of ingredients that Crow had given him from his sleeve and flip through it. The first line of words made Huaisher's eyes begin to hurt. 50 origin crystals. According to the latest exchange rate, a single origin crystal was worth 2,400,000 Eastern Xia yuan. If he wanted to buy them in bulk, he would need to pay a premium of around 10%, which was around 100 million. Just kill me. Huaisher sighed. 100 million? Even if you killed me, I wouldn't be able to earn that much. Also, it's just an advancement. Do I really need to find a system to spend money on? Of the 50 origin crystals, around 30 of them are the cost of renting a top-notch Eastern Xia alchemy workshop. Trust me, 60 million for you to use for a week is already a friendly price. Crow calmly said, of the remaining 10 or so origin crystals, 10 of them are fixed for you to use when you need to extract origin substances. The rest are reserved as insurance. If you have the ability to freeload a Cavendish workshop-level alchemy laboratory, then you can get rid of this clause. Do they have to be that high-end? They have to be that high-end. The young arbiter of life's stigmata needs to be absolutely precise and absolutely stable. Otherwise, if something goes wrong, you might have to go to the Abyss shaving room to get a membership card. At the very least, you'll have to go through bloodletting treatment once a week. Huaisher endured the heartache and continued to read, not to mention the other messy things. The materials produced in the border and the Abyss were enough to drive people crazy. Blood, hatred, crystal, divine light of grace, undying flame, ashes of evil. Which one of these was not a unique product of the great genealogy? Precious materials that were monopolized by various organizations and strategic materials that were tightly sealed. Why does celestial genealogy burn so much money? You have to understand that when the Astronomical Society revised celestial genealogy, it was the most prosperous and huge period. It can be said that everything in the border of the present realm or the Abyss is available. They never need to consider the cost-performance ratio when designing. No, it should be said that the cost-performance ratio they consider is the benefits obtained in the long term. Therefore, they always strive for the best. Crow said lightly, in fact, there are versions that don't burn money, but haven't you experienced it? How big is the gap between your power as a ghost and the ghost in Nibelungen? Even if they are from the same origin, there is a world of difference. If you want to gradually unlock the authority in the Book of Destiny, the necessary price is indispensable. They were both zither, but why was an antique made by a master so much more expensive than a factory brand? In addition to the huge difference between the sound quality, wasn't it also because of the difference in identity? Huaisher understood the reason, but why did it have to cost so much money? At least there was something for Huaisher to put down. What confused him the most was the part written by Crow at the end, the most important thing. The birth of life, the true essence of nothingness, the connection of souls, the illusion of yesterday. What are these? And what are they? It's the literal meaning. Whether you have comprehended it yourself or obtained an artifact that can achieve the same effect, it doesn't matter even if you have it for a moment. This is the most essential power of the young master of life. You must experience it. Compared to those tangible things that can be bought or snatched, these illusory things are the most precious and the most difficult to collect. It must depend on your luck and hard work. If we are lucky enough tonight, we can probably gather the most difficult one to get. When the time comes, it will depend on your performance. With this sentence in front of her, Huaisher at least became a little more spirited. After drinking a few cups of wine, she no longer continued to drink. Instead, she sat up straight and closed her eyes to focus, quietly waiting. Who wouldn't like the opportunity to save money? He didn't know if it was because he had stayed here for a long time or because he had finally gotten used to the atmosphere here. Huaisher felt that his suppressed sacred mark finally had a little room to move. The calm origin substance gradually rippled. It was as if it had finally begun to adapt after diving hundreds of meters underwater. After absorbing the vitality in the wine and food, Weischer's chaotic origin substance began to change, transforming into a type more suitable for this place. It changed the details of its attributes freely like a chameleon. After Weischer discovered this, he couldn't hold back the joy in his heart. Didn't this mean that he could just pick up a random blade of grass and taste it wherever he went in the future? Immediately afterwards, he finally sensed the abnormality floating in the air. Abnormalities were expected. In fact, it would be strange if there was anything normal in this place shrouded in eternal darkness. But Weischer still felt that something was wrong. As he gazed at the unrestrained banquet in front of him, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. Most of the chill brought about by the premonition of death came from the banquet attendees, but there was also a very important part that came from nowhere. In other words, this abnormality was hidden too well, so well that Weischer couldn't find any traces of it. Weischer picked up his round fan and peered through the gaps in the banquet hall one by one. The evil spirits who had become dissolute and violent after getting drunk, as well as the officials who seemed even stranger, either sang loudly or recited poems. Some even gathered in groups of 2s and 3s to have fun. There were also some who ate big mouthfuls of food. Some of the more elegant ones even lowered their curtains and began to savor the fragrance of the incense, loudly praising the elegant taste. While they were drinking, someone sighed helplessly, "What a pity! There's good wine and good music, but there's no bright moon for people to appreciate. Otherwise, wouldn't it be even more enjoyable? Bright moon? Isn't that simple?" The snake-faced physician in the banquet hall laughed loudly. He pulled out a piece of white paper from his sleeve and used a pair of scissors to cut it into the shape of a disc. He then tossed it into the cloudy sky outside the banquet hall. The white paper flew into the sky and rapidly expanded. Like a jade disc, it began to emit a lustrous light. It transformed into a bright moon. The skill of this moon paper cut technique was truly astonishing. Immediately afterwards, under the illumination of the pale light, the officials in the banquet hall began to lose all restraint. The group of evil spirits began to sing loudly and dance. However, Weischer was becoming more and more dazed. Drowsy. It wasn't just that the alcohol had suddenly taken over his head. It was also that the changes in the origin substance had harmonized with the darkness of this place. Weischer's vision began to blur. A gust of cold wind blew over, bringing with it a sense of coolness. The banquet hall began to grow louder and louder. However, in Weischer's eyes, that gust of cold wind suddenly caused the scene in front of him to ripple slightly. It was as if a curtain had been lifted, revealing a small gap in the void. He noticed it so quickly. In that instant, the crow in the Book of Destiny sighed. "Don't say that I'm intentionally scaring a child." The crisp sound of fingers snapping echoed in Weischer's ears. In the blink of an eye, the beautiful illusion was torn apart, revealing the darkness hidden behind the darkness. The hell behind the hell. Weischer sucked in a breath of cold air. Chapter 277. With the crisp snap of the crow's fingers, everything around him instantly changed. The massive and magnificent palace hall became transparent. For some reason, Huaishur felt as if his line of sight had been pulled out from where he was, breaking free from the restraints of his body. It was like the spiritual sense in fantasy novels, shooting in all directions. Next to his ear, there was an inexplicable, illusory chuckle. Thus, his eyes peeked into the true savage silhouette in the darkness. In the endless gloom and pitch black, it was difficult to distinguish up from down, left from right, front from back, and there was no distance. There was only the shattered palace floating in the endless darkness. When Huaishur raised his head, he saw the source of the sinister wind outside the palace. It was a mouth as large as an abyss. With pitch-black, incomplete teeth, it slowly opened, and as it breathed, it became a wind that swept through the darkness. A nose that was as big as a mountain rose above the huge mouth of the abyss. Then, a pair of eyes slowly opened, hidden behind the paper-thin moon. The eyes looked down with innate malice and mockery, appreciating every face that was intoxicated in the banquet. Frighteningly, even though it was so cruel, the half of the face that peeked out of the darkness was so beautiful, innately sacred and pure, that one could not look directly at it. The remaining half of the face was covered in cracks and malignant boils. It was a mess of flesh and blood, tragic and savage, making one think of an ominous fetus. Under Huaishur's feet, the earth suddenly revealed its ugly shape. Layers of tragic flesh and blood wriggled, extending to the ends of one's sight. It was like a palm. They lifted up the entire palace. Thousands of tiny, finger-like tentacles extended from it, wrapping around every person's body, absorbing their joy and injecting the vicious poison of the abyss. The shattered fan in Huaishur's hand released a wisp of smoke that wrapped around his body, confusing the tentacles of flesh and blood around him, making it impossible for them to find any trace of Huaishur. This was his true life-saving talisman. Huaishur shivered. Pah! The blood-red eyes seemed to have sensed something after the crescent moon was cut out of thin paper. Its indifferent gaze swept across the area where Huaishur was. The round fan in Huaishur's hand suddenly let out a mournful cry. The cracks on the surface of the fan widened. In this sudden shock, Huaishur's consciousness shook, and he came back from his trance, only to find that everything he had just seen had disappeared. He was still sitting silently in the corner of this banquet that was filled with fanaticism and joy. He was drenched in sweat. What was that just now? Huaishur asked in a low voice, was it an illusion or was this place real? It's not appropriate to call it an illusion. After all, both sides are real. Crow calmly replied, you don't need to be afraid. Just now, your origin substance sensed something, and the mountain ghost's sacred insignia forcefully raised your vision. When you look down from a higher vantage point, your soul transforms everything that is indescribable to human eyes, ears, and ears into content that you can understand. In other words, everything just now might have been your imagination, but it is the scene that is closest to the essence of this abyss. I saw a woman. Huaishur swallowed her saliva and licked the last drop of wine from her glass. She gasped for breath. It's as if she's holding the entire palace in her hands like a toy. She's looking at us, but half of her face has already rotted away like a corpse. You actually saw her directly? Crow's tone became mischievous. Your luck with women is really too good. Who wants to be fated with this kind of thing? Huaishur glared at her. What exactly is it? The condensation of the abyss precipitation, the miracle that hibernates here, the original emperor of this city, and the foundation of this city's existence. Level 5 sacred insignia, Sun Shaman. Crow calmly said, or you can also call it me, who... The Queen of Ingzhou's history? Huaisha stared. Didn't she die a long time ago? That's right, but it doesn't make sense that she couldn't leave something behind. Crow casually avoided the main point and calmly said, if I didn't guess wrongly, the entire Yamatai city was built on top of this sacred insignia. In other words, this hell was completely formed by this sacred insignia. Once again, he was shocked by the power of a level 5 ascendant. As an ascendant who absorbed the miracle of the abyss, being able to create such a large hell was not impossible. But after seeing it with his own eyes and experiencing it for himself, Huaisha still felt a shudder. Soon after, he noticed the contradiction. Then why is she so strange? Huaisha frowned. Even if a level 5 sacred insignia was contaminated by the abyss, it shouldn't be like this, right? If it was condensed and formed, then it would be the leader of a large group, the ruler of Yamatai City. But why was she hiding behind the scenes? And with a twisted appearance that was neither alive nor dead, it was as if she was mixed with something else. Now, instead of saying that she was the ruler of Yamatai City, it was better to say that she was a fetus, right? Crow saw through his thoughts. A fetus that breeds an ominous disaster, an empty shell. She suddenly changed the topic and asked, by the way, do you remember that in the information you read before, Yamatai City was a border? Huaisha was stunned. He finally recalled the words he had seen in the past. It was unbelievable. Why would a border suddenly sink into the abyss and become hell? Although they were both not part of the present realm, the existence of the border and hell were completely different. Although the former had a harsh environment, it still belonged to the scope of the present realm. It could be said that each had a different space. But hell was completely different from the other two. If the present realm was like a basin, then the border would be countless icebergs surrounding the present realm, layer upon layer blocking the precipitous breath of the abyss to prevent this world from being swallowed by hell. But now, an iceberg had collapsed into the sea for no reason. It was definitely not Dongxia's fault for turning on the air conditioner too much. There had to be more reasons. For example, in order to restore the broken stigmata excavated from the abyss, the entire border was transformed into a vessel for rebirth. Crow reminded, just like the coffins specially made for the stigmata, turning all of this into a fetus, allowing the broken miracle of the abyss to reform and forcibly create a new 5th-level stigmata. If you understand it this way, isn't it easier to understand? Huaisha was stunned. In order to obtain a 5th-level stigmata, they did not hesitate to create a hell. Don't tell me that humans have not created enough hells. Now that there is a miracle as a gift, it should be said that they have profited greatly. Crow sneered, integrating the miracle of the abyss into the premature child born by the Queen of Rotten Dreams, using the rotten shell as the foundation, extracting the power of this hell, and then catalyzing the fusion of the miracle, finally giving birth to the power of the Sun Wizard. The person who can come up with this method is definitely a genius. The Ingzhou genealogy is simply picking up a ghost. It seems that in order to contend with the Wu family, the Gong family has also exhausted all means. The boundary wedge of this border was broken. It may have been a mistake, but it may have been done deliberately. In the end, no one expected the situation to go out of control so quickly, causing the Dongxia genealogy to intervene, right? Huaisha only felt his head buzzing. After a long time, he finally let out a sigh of relief. Unknowingly, he was involved in the shadow of a fight between immortals, which made him a little restless. Wait, I remember that the Queen of Rotten Dreams is on the side of the rancher? Yes, after all, the two sides have formed an alliance. It's not impossible to treat them as one. Crow nodded. Before she joined with the rancher, that insect was very ambitious. Unfortunately, every child she gave birth to died, tragically, and could not bear the power of the abyss. In the end, with the help of the rancher's power, she was able to create a real, surviving evil. Some things are just like this. They are destined to have no fate with the stage of this world. Constantly jumping around, they can only appear as supporting characters in the background. TSK. TSK, this is truly the life of a disliked queen. Her words were filled with ridicule and malice, which made Huaishir feel a little surprised. This was the first time he had felt such pure ridicule from her. But soon, she did not say anything else. Huaishir pondered over her words, and doubts once again appeared in his mind. Then, that thing hidden in the palace, after fusing with the child who died prematurely, is it dead or alive? Worm grass, do you understand? Crow said, "It is only a monster that was born after absorbing the nutrients of the child who died prematurely. Even though it has a sacred mark, it is still unable to take form and can only be trapped here. Now, this palace is its toy box, and everyone who enters here is its toy." As soon as she said this, another crack appeared in the fan in front of Huaishir. It was about to be torn apart. In the corner, Huaishir's hairs stood on end. In front of him, a drunken evil spirit suddenly opened his eyes and ferociously looked around. "The smell of people! I really smell it. You must be starving, right? Eat more. Don't always look like a country bumpkin." The monster next to him laughed at him and threw a piece of meat on his table at him, looking very disdainful. This made the evil spirit angry, and the two of them began to fight. But compared to the chaos in the hall, it was insignificant. Huaishir knew that he would not be able to hold on for much longer. At that moment, he suddenly saw that the bright moon outside the hall had suddenly shattered, and in the dark and empty gray sky, there were suddenly 7 sharp rays of light that rose slowly. Dubhi, Merak, Fekta, Migres, Alioth, Mizar, Alcade. Iron-like killing intent descended from the sky, but what was even more frightening were the 2 fleeting lights hidden outside the 7 stars. 7 revealed, 2 hidden. Big Dipper. The Big Dipper descended from the sky. Yi Shuya suddenly appeared in the sky outside the palace, bringing with him the majestic Big Dipper stars. He raised his finger and chopped down at the palace immersed in darkness. In the blink of an eye, violent fluctuations spread out. Countless starlight condensed into iron-like metal, bringing with it layers of blazing flames. They converged in one place, forming an earth-shattering rainstorm, smashing down on the ground. Rumbling sounds rose and fell one after another. It's finally here. When all the guests' attention was attracted by the attack, Crow's voice sounded in Huaishir's ear. "Right now, Huaishir, it's time for you to move." Chapter 278. Huaishir had never thought that Yi Shuya's destructive power could reach such a terrifying level. When the dark clouds in the sky were torn apart, countless meteorites that had condensed into iron let out a roar, whistling through the air with tails of flames. The sound of the air being torn apart rose and fell. It was unknown how long the Social Security Bureau had been preparing, but Yi Shuya had actually advanced to the peak of the 4th step in the short span of a day. With the support from all over the place, she was like a mortar base, and her firepower was frighteningly fierce. With a wave of her hand, stars fell like rain. The big ones were the size of trucks, and the small ones were the size of tables and chairs. Even if the pure quality could not reach the terrifying level of metal, was the appearance of the stars falling like rain just for the sound and light effects. The fog that enveloped the palace was instantly torn apart. Immediately after breaking through layers of formless membranes, the illusory meteorites that had been rubbed until they were red had already formed sharp blades, and when they fell to the ground, They let out a sharp whistle. The palace trembled violently. Every time a meteorite fell, it would overturn all the buildings within a radius of dozens of meters, leaving a deep fissure in the ground. Within the fissure, a fountain of blood quickly gushed out. In the deepest part of the palace, the sound of a baby crying rang out, following the loud rumble of something crawling. In the darkness, the huge rotten face that Huaishur had glimpsed for an instant suddenly rose up, opened its mouth, and spat out vicious solar flames at Yishuya. The intense light that gathered into a beam swept out, instantly extending thousands of meters. Everywhere it passed, all the tall buildings were cut down by the solar flames. Even if it had not formed its own consciousness, the degree of completeness of the Sun Witch's stigmata was enough to react to external stimuli. Moreover, at this moment, it was parasitizing the remains of the child who had died prematurely. It was completely equivalent to an ascendant with divinity. If it had its own consciousness and battle experience, perhaps Yishuya's earth-shattering attacks would have been instantly destroyed, and then Yishuya would have been crushed to death. Unfortunately, now it only had its instincts left. Under the cover of the Big Dipper, Yishuya continuously split into countless phantoms, luring the Sun Witch's embryo to attack him. In the dark, Shunshang's power always covered each other, constantly, narrowly dodging the fierce counterattacks. The falling of the stars became more and more intense. The battle, at this moment, could be said to be world-shaking. Amidst the chaotic palace, countless people cried out as they fled. They were continuously crushed to death by the meteors that fell from the sky, or they were bound by the tentacles that grew from the sun shaman embryos. They were absorbed and instantly turned into skeletons. Huaishur nimbly jumped between the shadows amidst the countless fleeting blazing lights. The dark concealment of the Yin soul brought him great convenience, allowing him to quickly approach the depths of the palace. Furthermore, the mountain ghost's ability to sense the vitality of plants helped him to decipher the network of vitality beneath his feet, allowing him to constantly avoid the tentacles that broke out of the ground. They were like ants under the feet of two giants. Relying on his premonition of death, Huaishur began to repeatedly jump on the edge of danger. The cracks on the round fan were still slowly expanding. Once the fan shattered, he might be exposed to the chaotic demons around him. What awaited him was either being torn apart and eaten, or being turned into a dried corpse by the tentacles of the sun shaman embryo. Amidst the chaos, Huaishur stumbled as he ran, but he did not forget to ask Crow. He couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes. "You already knew that Yishuya was coming?" "Why wouldn't I know?" Crow asked from his shadow. "The people of the Ying continent sent the Queen of Rotten Dreams' premature child to the border, not hesitating to turn this place into hell, intending to recreate the incomplete sun shaman stigmata. Right now, the sun shamans have already become one with this hell. If the Eastern Summer people want to pluck the fruit and seize Yamatai, they must make a move on the stigmata. But if they don't come here, how can they control the stigmata of Bei-Mi, Hu? This place is already a place they must seize. But how can you be sure of the time?" Huaishur lowered his head, dodging a sweeping tentacle. He was almost hit by the aftershock of the attack. His vision darkened. Immediately after, hearing Crow's answer, he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of old blood. "I guess," Crow calmly said. "Yishuya spent so much effort to enter this place to advance. Wasn't it all for the sake of absolute superiority? Right now, there are only 2 days and 1 night left in the competition. Even if they don't come tonight, they will still come tomorrow night. Moreover, the longer they delay, the more changes there will be. Naturally, they have to hurry." In other words, you didn't have any confidence at all. Thinking about how he had almost delivered himself to their doorstep, Huaishur's face turned pale with fright. This is called a risky investment. You understand? Crow helplessly sighed. Take a gamble. A motorcycle becomes a Land Rover. If you can't bear to part with your child, how can you get a battle wolf? Huaisha rolled his eyes. I am that silly child, right? Don't look down on yourself. Young man, you are much smarter than that silly child. Crow saw that Huaisha's face had turned ugly again. He quickly changed the topic. Don't be so picky. Let's hurry up. It's not easy to have a tall person in front of us. Let's hurry up and find something good. Boom! A burning meteor fell from the sky, smashing right in front of Huaisha. Terrifying waves of air whistled in all directions. Huaisha's entire body was swept up like a withered leaf. He flew over the collapsed wall, and fell into the courtyard behind the wall. Without waiting for him to land, he raised the axe in his hand and jumped down. The snake-faced servant, who was about to scream, was instantly split in half. But the green light that shot out from its eyes before it died made Huaisha's left hand quickly shrivel and wither. It looked as if it had aged to the limit in an instant. Huaisha rolled on the ground, opened his mouth, and violently vomited blood. Then he suddenly pounced on a big tree next to him and began to suck wildly. A meteor had instantly caused him to be seriously injured. He almost died on the spot. Find something good. It would be good if he didn't find his own corpse. It was too dangerous here. It felt like he was carrying a takeout bucket across the battlefield. If he was not careful, he would be bombed into meat paste. Even if he did not die, the final result was most likely to be delivered to his doorstep. It was not a place where a newbie like him should be. Fortunately, he remembered to hide the round fan in his arms during the impact. It did not explode on the spot, otherwise he would have been done for. Precious time was wasted for more than 10 seconds. When he finally got up from the ground, his first reaction was to throw out the recuperated red glove from the Nibelungen. Then he picked up a basket from the ground and stuffed it into its hands. Go inside. If you see any flowers or plants, just grab 2 handfuls and stuff them inside. Later, come and meet me. Be careful not to be caught by others. The red glove raised its eyes and looked at him as if it was looking at an idiot. In the end, it reluctantly carried the small basket on its back and touched the flowers and plants along the way. Be careful. Huaisha still did not feel at ease. He stood where he was and ordered loudly. Soon, he turned around and groped his way into the palace. At that moment, he felt the earth tremble violently. It was like a violent earthquake. In an instant, the earth shook and the sky shook. The originally dark and gloomy sky seemed to be lit up by flames that rose from nowhere. It turned into a blood-red color. It stung every pair of eyes that woke up with a start. Huaisha was stunned. He looked up at the sky and was about to say something when he heard a loud sound of steel twisting through the entire Yamatai city. Then he saw the sky cracked. Huaisha numbly covered his face. Does anyone still remember that this is the rookie competition? The system of the Xinyue framework suddenly appeared. The mission panel shook violently and the final mission appeared. Survival. In the long battle, you have proven your talent, strength, and luck. Now, the competition has ushered in the final test. Please survive in the disaster that will break the sky and the earth. There is only one condition. Live. The gate of glory will open for the winner. As expected, the competition is coming to an end. Under the same red sky, in the dead silent paradise, Kitten stretched out an arm from its mouth. It flicked the ash from its cigarette and looked up at the huge crack in the sky. It laughed out loud at the misfortune of others. From the looks of it, it is really a battle royale. Yes, it is indeed a battle royale. but the contestants are in charge of escaping, and the monsters are in charge of killing. Recalling the happy times of the past few days, it was really hard to part with them. He shook his head and sighed. But the good times are always so short. Staring at the pure darkness outside the crack, Kitten picked up the phone again. "Hello? Where are you?" He listened to the reply on the phone and nodded. "Oh, very good. Please wait for a while. I still have something to do here. Aya, you are too polite. I will have to rely on everyone to take care of me in the future." The phone hung up. He slowly looked up and stared at the flash of light outside the crack. He chuckled softly. Then there was the sound of the sky collapsing and the earth cracking in the distance. Calculating the time, it is about time. He played with the phone in his hand and sighed softly. No matter how long they have been waiting, they should have taken action by now, right? As he waited, in the darkness of the central district, there was suddenly an aura that belonged to paradise. It made him nod, slightly. But then there was another one. Kitten suddenly paused. He was stunned on the spot and looked up in disbelief. How could there be two? Two? No matter how he looked at it, he could not be wrong. But Kitten found it hard to believe that there were two ascenders with the aura of paradise there. What was going on? Other than Weisher, was there anyone else in this city who had obtained the inheritance of paradise? While he was stunned, he heard the sound of the collapse of the outer city. A dim light emerged from the void and covered Yamatai City. It was slowly closing in. It was the Shinua framework that was beginning to shrink inch by inch. The rules of the human world were constantly moving away. Then a viscous darkness that was almost boiling emerged from the abyss. It poured in from the outside like magma. It did not let go of any inch of land and completely drowned everything. Everywhere it passed, all the contestants who were caught in it quietly turned into ashes. Exit, the final stage of the competition, had begun. And Weisher heard the crisp sound of a bell coming from the darkness. Behind the red torii, the darkness danced with the sound of the bell. Chapter 2, 79. The deeper Seiji ventured into the palace, the more he was amazed by the structure that defied common sense. It was impossible for this place to exist in a three-dimensional space. It was just like a toy box that had been messed up. Even though every corner of the palace appeared solemn and majestic, there was nothing that made sense about it. Sometimes, when he turned a corner, he would see countless dilapidated palaces. When he pushed open a small wooden door and walked through a wooden door, he would find himself in a solemn hall with countless flesh and blood wriggling around like worms. After passing through a corridor, the fake scenery would transform into a literal hell. When he took a step back, the world would change again. If it weren't for the crow's guidance, he might have already been lost in this maddening maze. Not only was this palace chaotic and disorderly, but it also faintly contained a power that made one go crazy. Huaisher guessed that if one was infected by the outside world, the more they overestimated themselves and walked forward, the more horrifying and tragic the situation they saw would be. In the end, they would be completely imprisoned in the deepest part of hell. But when he passed through a long corridor and pushed open a paper door, he found himself in front of a silent shrine. The crisp sound of a bell rang in the distance. Seiji couldn't hear it clearly because of the towering torii, but the crisp bell had a strange magical power that dazzled and mesmerized him. He couldn't help but be drawn in by it. In just a short moment of waiting, Huaisher saw several dazed attendants stagger into the torii and follow the crisp bell into the darkness. It didn't take long for them to reach the bottom and turn into shriveled corpses in the darkness. In the courtyard behind the torii, the bell's ringing became louder and clearer. It absorbed the prey in the trap and condensed them into something solid. The Kagami bell. This was a ritual that belonged to the local religion of Ingzhou. It slowly vibrated in the darkness and made a rhythmic, low sound. As the bells ringing overlapped, a faint and distant song and melody sounded from the courtyard in the deepest part of the darkness. A flickering flame lit up, but in this deathly, silent shrine, it didn't bring any warmth. Instead, it made this place even colder. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He could not tell whether it was a chant or a song, but a child's whisper suddenly sounded in his ears, as if it wanted to drill into his soul. The child softly chanted an ancient incantation that was difficult to understand. Biliu tribe, from good to good. Biliu tribe. The crisp sound of white jade colliding with each other gradually evolved from this lingering chant, constantly reverberating in his mind. When he suddenly woke up from his stupor, he realized that he had unknowingly uttered the inexplicable words in his mind, and stepped into torii. He felt his face stiffen. At first, he thought that it was his face that was frozen, but when he touched it, he felt a cold, smooth texture of iron. It wasn't until he staggered back and stepped out of the torii that his petrified skin returned to normal under the nourishment of vitality. Then he saw, with the singing of the sacrificial song, all the plants in the shrine courtyard were quickly petrified. In the end, they were like clusters of beautiful jade, fixed in an enchanting and gorgeous posture. Wisps of black mist rose from it, full of greed and ferocity. Even if it was only a drop, it was a fierce poison that was enough to destroy Huaisher's soul. He couldn't go in. The premonition of death beat his consciousness like never before, bringing him such a resolute judgment. He would die if he went in. He should have turned around and left, but the mountain ghost's holy mark seemed to be cheering, as if it had sensed something hidden in the shrine and started a pulsating resonance. Huaisher could conclude that there was something inside, something he had to get. If he missed this opportunity, he would lose it forever. He didn't know when such a thought had appeared in his mind, but it caused him to be at a loss and unable to make a choice. This place was truly too dangerous for him. Even a single glance from a single snake-faced attendant had caused the withered marks on his arm to not vanish until now. Should I do it or not? That's the question. Huaishir scratched his head, hoping that someone would come over and say a few words to encourage him and give him courage. But just when he needed it the most, Crow had disappeared. He had no idea where Crow had run off to. He had to face this problem by himself. There was still a bit of time left. Huaishir patted his pockets and squatted outside the Tori shrine like an old farmer observing the eerie shrine. He thought about it, calmly analyzed it, boldly hypothesized, carefully verified it, seriously considered it, and seriously considered it. Finally, he put out his cigarette. He turned around and left. I'm leaving. There are too many perverts in this group. I only have one life. I shouldn't waste it like this. But after taking 2 steps back, he felt reluctant to leave. He looked back at the pitch-black shrine and recalled Crow's words. The opportunity to transform a bicycle into a motorcycle and a motorcycle into a tomahawk is right in front of me. I'm already here. It's New Year, and I'm still young. Is it really appropriate to leave like this? Huaishir let out a long sigh, gritted his teeth, and stomped his foot. He had decided to do this job. He threw away his final hesitation and carefully took out the crumpled flyer from his pocket. He looked at the picture of a kitten on it. Let's draw a circle first. A cold wind blew through the air. Then he drew a smaller circle next to the larger one. A tragic screech sounded out as countless amounts of origin substance gathered in the 2 circles, revealing layers of malice from the abyss. Huaishir hesitated for a moment, then used his withered finger to draw a final circle. Instantly, a thunderous sound tore through the silence inside and outside the shrine. Even the eerie chanting was interrupted. The ground shook violently. Huaishir's movements were swift as he filled in the missing facial features. Soon, a lifelike kitten picture appeared in front of Huaishir. Immediately afterwards, it began to madly absorb his origin substance. It wasn't until more than half of his origin substance was sucked dry that darkness erupted from the picture like a volcano. In the paradise, the kitten woke up from his stupor and felt a call from afar. After hesitating for a moment, he turned around and looked at the silent paradise behind him. The lights in the paradise lit up one by one, and the silent castle's doors opened with a bang. In the darkness, doors opened one after another. In the end, a group of pitch-black figures slowly emerged from within. The silhouettes covered in darkness made it difficult to see their faces. Only a pair of scarlet eyes lit up in the darkness, bursting with fury and greed. The kitten was stunned. Hey, you're actually this good to it. He was a little unconvinced as he stomped his feet. He put his hands on his hips and stared at the paradise in front of him with wide eyes. You don't know how expensive the daily necessities are until you're in charge. Just go and show your sincerity. Do you need the legal department to come out in full force? A sharp whistle sounded from the depths of the paradise, as if it was a response from the darkness. After a long time, the kitten sighed and shook his head helplessly. Fine, do as you wish. He waved his hand helplessly. Fortunately, this is the last ticket. Otherwise, sooner or later, everyone will be offended by you. Hey, remember to bring back some specialties. Don't come here in vain. So, after a long wait that made Huaishir feel a little incredulous, an ancient wooden door slowly rose in the darkness. It was decorated with patterns and reliefs from hell. Just looking at it, a mournful and painful aura hit him in the face. Huaishir swallowed his saliva and took a step back, subconsciously. Then, he heard the sound of knocking behind the door. It was as if fate was knocking on the door. Huaishir summoned up his courage, reached out his hand, and slowly twisted the door open. Then, A hurricane gushed out from the darkness behind the door, followed by a pair of pitch-black eyes that emerged from the opened gap, staring at Huaishur, who was close at hand. However, being stared at by that pair of eyes, Huaishur couldn't move. Only a small shadow of a crown appeared on the top of his head, proving his identity. After a long time, as if finally acknowledging him, the shadow slowly nodded and said with a hoarse voice, "Where are the pirates?" Huaishur breathed a sigh of relief. He was sweating profusely and almost couldn't stand still. His whole body leaned on the open door. Hearing the shadow's question, he hurriedly turned around and looked behind him. A finger popped out and pointed straight at the darkness behind the torii. The shadow didn't talk much. The shadow just nodded, took a step forward, and walked out of the dark door. The earth rumbled, and cracks spread in all directions. A crack appeared on the torii as if it couldn't bear the arrival of the strong. Holding something that looked like a briefcase in his hand, the shadow took out a pair of gold-rimmed glasses and put them on his face. He took out a document with the theme park's seal from the briefcase and stuck it on the door of the torii. For some reason, it glanced back at Huaishur with a meaningful look. Then he waved his hand behind him. As he moved forward, a line of pitch-black figures rushed out from behind the Hell's Gate and followed him into the shrine. The legal department was on the move. The melody of the song was instantly torn apart, and the chanting disappeared without a trace. The entire shrine seemed to be shaken by the shadow's power. Countless ropes shook angrily, and the petrified flowers and plants in the courtyard were all shattered. Countless vicious, vengeful spirits flew out and pounced on the shadow from the legal department. The shadow sneered and raised his hand. The vengeful spirits that pounced on him froze in place and collapsed with a scream. The terrifying monsters from the theme park walked into the shrine. They were like tanks rampaging through everything. Wherever it passed, everything was crushed into powder by that terrifying power. The torii outside the shrine collapsed. The jindo behind the torii collapsed. The venom-filled torii house collapsed. The bibliotheca library with notices on it was reduced to ashes. On both sides of the shrine, the blood-colored foxes on the stone pedestals opened their eyes. They quickly expanded and pounced, but they were trampled into pieces by the shadow from the legal department. The good brothers of darkness charged forward with a violent aura that caused all the gods and Buddhas to retreat. They chopped everything in their path and went straight for the root of the problem. They smashed the gift box in front of them with one punch, then raised their fist and tore the walls of the shrine. The darkness on their bodies rose up, and they grabbed the bloodthirsty sword shadows that flew up from the shrine and crushed them with all their might. In the shrine, surrounded by the jade fence, there was suddenly a bitter and shrill scream. Huaishur, who was hiding in the dark, was stunned. The army of this theme park is too ferocious. But he recalled the meaningful look that the shadow gave him just now. Huaishur suddenly turned around and saw that the lawyer's letter that was stuck on the broken torii had spontaneously combusted without any wind. More than half of it was burned. There was not much time left. Chapter 280. Under the crack in the sky, they could see the fire of the stars descending from the sky. The earth was shaking. The darkness behind them was converging like a tsunami, forming an iron wall that was tens of thousands of feet high. It was shrinking inch by inch, and its speed was getting faster and faster. Only 400 people left. Big Bone was curled up in the shadow of the tall building. He looked at the rapidly falling number on the system panel with a pale face. In just 10 minutes, the number had dropped from 1,200 to 400. The tide of darkness was getting closer and closer. He looked up at his teammates, unable to bear the pressure. "What should we do?" "Hold it in. Don't move." Tian Minjing crouched behind the wall, gritted his teeth, and replied, "Don't move. We'll die if we move." Outside, the streets were already in chaos. When all the ascendants were suppressed by the tide of darkness and had to gather in the central area, the battle inevitably broke out. No, it should be said that just as everyone thought and expected, the battle began smoothly and normally. The chaos and danger of the battle were beyond everyone's expectations. But what was more terrifying than the contestants were the monsters that came out of nowhere. It was as if he had unintentionally barged into the lair of a man-eating creature. As the thin fog spread, everything became mournful and horrifying. Formless ghosts wandered in the fog, and sharp, inhuman screeches kept coming from the sky. Something was roaring in anger. Fiery light swept across continuously, burning everything to ashes. Except for a dozen or so ferocious auras, all the other contestants could only huddle in the corner, guarding their meager trophies and waiting for the tide of calamity to pass. At least they would not lose everything. But the abyss did not want their capital. Instead, it generously gave them more blood. Thick blood gushed out from the bottom of the broken manhole cover like a tidal wave, turning into a torrential rain that sprayed selflessly in all directions. Ugly tentacles grew out from the places where the blood dripped, choosing to devour the people around them. A large number of lifeless corpses wandered between the blood and the tentacles. The ministers, nobles, and generals who were still dressed in ancient clothes had now been transformed beyond recognition. Some had snake faces, some had 100 eyes, some had multiple legs, and some had turned into beasts. Some of the behemoths ran, shaking the whole street. Some came and went silently like ghosts. The only thing they had in common was the thirst in their eyes and the desire for the souls of living creatures. Beautiful, beautiful. The officials who were bathed in blood crawled on the corpses and sucked the blood elegantly as if they were immersed in the joy of the banquet. Today's wine and dishes are exceptionally delicious. Bitter, bitter, dying from a broken carriage. Bitter. Save me, Father. Don't send me to be a living sacrifice. I hate you so much, you trash. I hate you so much. Hoarse cries and laughter echoed in the dark street. The entire Yamatai city finally shed its disguise of the past, and the calamities and miracles that had been slumbering in the darkness were awakened. After intensifying, everything quickly turned into a nightmare. And in the deepest part of the nightmare, a cold howl suddenly rang out. That was the howl of a wolf. Heaven and earth froze as that distant howl gradually approached. Outside the fog, above the blood-red sky, a dazzling star fell down, transforming into a pure white giant wolf, landing in front of Yishuaya. As countless white hairs fluttered in the wind, a holy and dignified aura rose from the body of the white wolf. The countless tentacles that grew out of the sun, which embryo, under the gaze of the white wolf, were cleanly cut into two. The cut was swift and fierce, without any signs of life, turning into ashes in the air. Yishuaya was stunned for a moment, then began to laugh happily. This time, the old man has finally bled a lot. She stretched out her hand, and the white wolf soared into the air, transforming into a shell of starlight, breaking apart inch by inch. What replaced it was a white light so dazzling that it was difficult to look straight at, falling into her hand. A rainbow pierced through the sun. Such an illusion suddenly appeared in everyone's consciousness. The gentle white wolf, with the Tao, will swim. The talisman has changed, is the spirit hook, following Yishuaya's chanting. This weapon that had followed the blackbird for a long time burst forth with a frightening aura. The white light condensed, forming a strange long hook. Stinking woman, prepare to say goodbye to your past. As if it was the flow of fate, the divinity that represented the change of fate was attached to the edge of the long hook. Amidst Yishuaya's laughter, it slashed towards the rotten face of the sun, which embryo? Eat my life's rebirth hook. Heaven and earth split apart. A dog barking? In the darkness, Huaisha raised his head in astonishment, looking at the sky shrouded in darkness and thick fog. Immediately after, he heard a tragic howl burst forth, like a disfigured woman, so vicious that it was frightening. Soon, an endless rain of blood, separated by the dark clouds, splashed down. The pungent blood carried a strange vitality that permeated through every opening. Wherever it landed, clumps of flesh and blood would immediately grow out of the mud and bricks, choosing to devour the people around them. Accompanied by the collapse of the jade fence, the main door of the main hall opened with a bang. The eerie sound of the divine music bell and the ghostly singing and dancing spread in all directions. Under the cold candlelight, the heavenly officials with their backs to the door and the witch dancing in front of the fire all turned their heads, almost turning 180 degrees. On their stiff and pale faces, a pair of blank eyes stared fixedly at the sudden visitor. The aura that made Huaisha shudder just now was emitted from their bodies. At first glance, they looked so handsome. Each person's face was flawless, but immediately after, from the deathly paleness that only appeared on corpses, an indescribable abnormality could be felt. As if pieced together from countless fragments, each perfect face was constantly changing. In the end, even with the naked eye, it was difficult to distinguish whether what one saw was an illusion or something else. One would only be attracted by the chill that was like a grave, involuntarily wanting to throw oneself into it. Still not enough. Your offerings are still not enough. Among the mournful screams in the sky, the heavenly officials in charge of the ceremony opened their mouths and spoke in a stiff voice, as if they were extremely frightened, but they did not put any emotion into it. Fury of the netherworld. Thus, the heavenly officials, and which assisting in the ceremony, screamed in hunger and thirst. Shengxi! 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 If you want a promotion, please go to the Human Resources Department, okay? Huaisha, who was hiding behind the heavenly officials, shook his head indifferently. What does this have to do with our cold and heartless legal department? Boom. The group of heavenly officials did not want to say any more nonsense. With an expression that said, all pirates should die, they raised their briefcases and took the lead to smash them down on the heavenly officials in front of them. In an instant, the heavenly officials' robes were torn apart, and a hideous and ugly giant spider broke out of its shell, frantically poking at the heavenly officials with its limbs. Then, one shell after another shattered. The beautiful skin was torn apart, and the products that had been brewing inside broke out of the shell, bathed in sticky blood, and screeched. Huaisha was flabbergasted at the sight of this group of demons holding a meeting. They had already become like this, but they still wanted to fight for a promotion. Your department was really too ruthless. If they worked harder, they would probably be rated as one of the top 100 companies in hell. At the back, Huaisha only had time to complain before his gaze was attracted by the object enshrined on the deity throne. It seemed to be the remains of some ancient artifact. The irregularly shaped copper plate was only the size of a palm. Its surface was smooth and flat, as if it had come from a copper mirror. There were also faded patterns on the edges. The gold that adorned it had already been replaced by bronze rust. It had been through a lot, but the lens looked empty and ethereal. Not only did it not reflect anything, it seemed like a gap in space that led to an unknown place. Countless rainbows flashed through it, and bubbles appeared and disappeared. In its reflection, the world was empty. Now, the broken lens was enshrined on the deity throne, and it had already been connected to the entire palace through the sacrifice. It was continuously absorbing the origin substance that was offered by the sacrifice, and it emitted an indescribable glow, forming a membrane that covered the entire palace. A relic from the border, or a fragment of the Philosopher's Stone? Huaishur couldn't tell. But one thing he was sure of was that this thing was definitely a good thing. Just looking at it, there was an indescribable thirst emerging from his heart. He wanted to get it, to own it, to occupy it, to devour it. Mine, 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 mine. The mountain ghost Stigmata was so excited that it was about to go crazy. The greedy desire of the same origin made Huaishur's eyes burn red in an instant. His gaze was fixed on the copper plate, and he couldn't move it away anymore. No, he had to find a way to *CK it. Huaishur rubbed his hands crazily, and his heart was ready to commit crimes again. Anyway, the celestial genealogy was one of his own here. It was only right for him to take his own things. He didn't even need to pay to go to the kitten paradise. What's wrong with taking your broken mirror? This logic was simply too good, and a little carelessness would cost him his life. So he had to think twice before he acted, taking advantage of the chaotic struggle between the Ministry of Justice and the priests and witches. Huaishur lurked in the shadows and slowly moved forward. The specific method was to rely on the talent of the ghost to disappear his body, and then hold the round fan in front of his eyes, and say in his heart, "You can't see me, you can't see me." Not sure if this ostrich strategy was particularly effective, or if the Allies' offensive was too strong. Huaishur held the increasingly broken round fan, and hid in the shadows where the candlelight couldn't reach. He jumped up and down, circled forward, and crept past the edge of the compound several times. The divine position was getting closer and closer, closer and closer, and the bronze mirror shook as if it was waving at him. It released a light. Under the light, Huaishur couldn't help but bounce out of the shadows. In his hand, the round fan shook, and flames ignited out of thin air, instantly burning the broken fan into ashes, leaving only the grip in Huaishur's hand. "It's over," the whole broken main hall ushered in a suffocating moment. In the chaotic battle of demons and ghosts, a sneaky teenager holding a bald fan in his hand suddenly jumped out, and he had already touched the front of the divine position. Aware of the shocked gazes from all directions, Huaishur turned his head stiffly and showed an awkward but polite smile. The next moment, the teenager swung his axe and jumped, splitting open the deformed priest in front of him. "What are you looking at?" Huaishur turned back and roared fiercely at the priests. "Why aren't you thanking brother Huaishur?" Chapter 281. According to the rules, at this time, someone should stutter and say, thank you, Brother Huaisher. Then Huaisher looked around and said to them, what's the use of wearing a suit and showing off your big brother's phone? Scare, follow the boss, and eat shit, lay. Finally, he left. However, none of this happened. It only existed in Huaisher's beautiful illusion. Not only did they not feel afraid, but they also showed an expression that they wanted to rush up and have a taste. The sudden silence only lasted for a moment, but Huaisher's main attack was seized by the dark good brother, who was the leader of the legal department. He suddenly raised the briefcase like a sledgehammer and smashed it on the head of the earth spider. Slurry burst out, and then several people pressed the earth spider to the ground. Some pulled its legs, some pulled its head, and quickly dismembered the officiator. It really made people wonder what this group of ghosts from the legal department was doing. After a brief moment of silence, countless furious screams rang out. All of the monsters pounced on Huaisher without any regard for their own safety. It was as if they had gone mad. It was like poking a wild donkey's nest. It made Huaisher's scalp tingle. Before that, he had already sensed the chill from the sky through the premonition of death. He ran forward and used steps with all his strength. Thunder rumbled. A hurricane burst forth from beneath his feet, leaving behind afterimages. Huaisher instantly disappeared from her original spot, breaking through the air in front of her. Steps. The axe cleaved open the enchantment formed by the salt circle on the ground. Salt powder flew out like iron sand, piercing dozens of bloody holes in his body. Ignoring the killing intent radiating from the symbols of the 10 divine treasures, Huaisher turned around in midair and threw the rope of sorrows at the copper mirror, despite being blocked by the 2 witches. The iron chain whistled out with sparks and black smoke, and instantly walked in a flexible zigzag shape in the air. The iron rings rubbed against each other, bursting out a shrill and sharp sound. In an instant, it coiled around the deity's seat and contracted. The runes hanging around the deity throne lit up and forced out a halo, blocking the fragments of the bronze mirror, making it difficult for the shrinking chain to cross the short distance. But in midair, Huaisher abruptly pulled on the chain, dodging the sharp claws of Miko-sama that were aimed at his neck. The spear of compassion appeared in his other hand, and the glorious light of 400 years of history condensed into steel. Following Huaisher's roar, the spear pierced downwards. Open! The halo shook violently and shattered. The chains retracted and instantly pulled the copper mirror fragment away from the deity position and rolled back. At that moment, a furious roar sounded. The sky above his head suddenly shattered, and a rotting giant hand covered in maggots descended from the sky, as if it wanted to crush this fly that dared to touch its treasure. The surrounding dark figures from the legal department suddenly stretched out like chopsticks and raised their hands to block the giant rotten hand. However, in less than a second, those dark good brothers were crushed by the giant hand. A biting wind pressure came from across the air. A chill from the soul burst forth, and Huaisher's vision darkened. He felt that his soul was about to shatter under the crushing pressure of this giant hand. Is there still a boss? This is the end of me. At that moment, as the chain rapidly contracted, the broken mirror fragment finally touched Huaisher's fingertips. Then everything froze. Time stood still. Whether it was the cold light that flew out from the offerings that represented the 10 divine treasures, or the rotting giant hand that slapped down from the dark sky, or the collapsing main hall, or even the ferocious creatures that were flying towards him from all directions, all of them were different. Huaisher saw a wisp of sparks pass by in front of him and condense in the air. He felt that he was suspended in midair, as if he was flying. The ripples of the wind distorted the swaying candle flame, and the scattered light illuminated the broken bronze mirror. But the fragments of the bronze mirror illuminated Huaishir's face. In the fleeting reflection in the mirror, Huaishir saw that his body was rapidly dimming and dissipating, replaced by a mountain ghost burning with green flames. In the crack in his chest, the blazing flame of the soul spewed out. It was a silent call. As a result, the bronze mirror was broken and quickly collapsed, leaving only a wisp of iron dust gathered from copper rust. A torrent swept from his fingertips and poured into Huaishir's soul. The core formed by the intertwining of the divine mark, and the soul emerged again. The broken outline of the bronze mirror was no longer there. Instead, it overlapped with the crack in his chest and turned into a perfect circle in his soul. It was like this from the beginning. They were integrated into one. They formed a perfect reflection and could not be distinguished from each other. Through the gap in his chest, his consciousness seemed to have become a mirror, reflecting everything in an instant and then peering into the essence of all things. Whether it was the rotten hand above his head that was formed by the combination of the premature child and the sun wizard, the divine priests around him who had lost themselves and turned into corpses, or the dark shadow of the Ministry of Justice formed purely by obsession. There were also the palace eroded by flesh and blood, the stinking wind, the dark sky, and the animated earth. Under the reflection of the bronze mirror, everything was fleeting like a fleeting bubble. It was difficult to perceive any sense of reality. Through the reflection in the mirror, it was as clear and distant as watching a fire from the other side of the river. The world was illusory. Then what was the scene in the mirror? Was it an illusion within an illusion? What was he who was integrated into the bronze mirror? Was it an illusion within an illusion? If it was nothingness, then where did the illusion come from? If it was a dream, then where was he? Endless questions flashed through his mind. In the end, they formed an indescribable understanding and understanding. He understood what nothingness was. This was the true essence of nothingness. In his days, he suddenly felt the ability of premonition of death suddenly knock on the surface of the mirror. It was like a hammer without any warning or clue. In the short moment of stillness, he saw everything in the mirror of nothingness that was regarded as illusory start to move on its own. Huaishir fell from the sky. First, he was pierced full of holes by the light of the 10 divine treasures. Then, the giant hand completely crushed the good brother of darkness beside him, completely smashing him into a pile of meat paste. In the end, he was divided and eaten by the surrounding demons and ghosts. It was a tragic sight. The originally incomprehensible scene was transformed into a comprehensible scene in a flash. In just a short moment, he felt a wave of weakness. In his body, more than half of the originally chaotic and enormous vitality was violently extracted by the mirror as the price for this prophecy. In the end, before the scene completely faded, an illusory path appeared from the mirror. That was his only way out. In the next moment, the frozen time began to surge mightily. Huaishir roared, ignoring the sharp, cold light that was coming at him from all directions. He swung the spear in his hand and thrust it downwards with all his might. The steel spear shaft was instantly bent into an arc, and his body bounced up like a pole vaulter. The tip of his nose brushed past the cold light that was enough to tear him to shreds. He soared into the air, courting his own death as he met the large hand that was coming at him. He threw out the rope of sorrow with his left hand. It wedged deeply into the broken corridor pillar and suddenly contracted. It pulled his body and flew to the side. Like a nimble fly, it flew out from between the fingers of a child who died prematurely. If it was just a hair's breadth away, he would be torn into pieces. But he did not expect that the moment he passed by, the snake-like maggots on the back of his hand suddenly jumped up, A few of them bit his shoulders and thighs, injecting fierce poison. The giant hand slammed down with a bang. A terrifying wave of chi burst forth from the collision. A hurricane swept out, instantly tearing apart the materialized form and black shadow nearby. Huaishir instantly lost feeling in half of his body. Immediately afterwards, a shock wave of origin substance came from the wind. It was just a simple attack, but it would not stop until he was dead. Huaishir had no way of resisting. He only felt his vision go black, and he fainted. In the last moment, he subconsciously pulled out the sword at his waist and slashed downwards. "Big brother, save me." The hanging curtain shattered under the trampling of the iron hooves. Big brother had come. A sudden neigh came from the void. A handsome white horse leapt out from the darkness. It opened its mouth and suddenly bit Huaishir's collar, flinging the unconscious youth onto its back. Immediately afterwards, the iron hooves stomped on the materialized face in front of it and rose into the air. Without any warning, it turned at a right angle, defying gravity and galloping between the walls and pillars. The monsters in the main hull screamed miserably. They reached out to pull the white horse back, but they could not even touch the edge of the white shadow. In just an instant, it rushed out of the main hall and broke through the invisible restraints. It neighed loudly. A mournful scream came from the sky. The sun, which embryo convulsed in pain and covered its rotting face. On its face, the originally beautiful left eye that was as bright as the moon disappeared. All that was left was a pitch-black hole with blood oozing out of it. Without the suppression of the bronze mirror in the shrine, countless cracks appeared on the membrane above the palace, and it was instantly riddled with holes. In the collapsed main hall, all the monsters' movements paused. They whined and melted into blood. After surviving for a long time by relying on the fragments of the bronze mirror, they welcomed their own end. They had completely perished in this cruel hell, ignoring the giant rotting hand that angrily fumbled, rummaged, and destroyed. The shadows of the legal department in the ruins quietly watched the white horse leave until it disappeared into the darkness. On Tori, the lawyer's letter finally burned out, and all the shadows instantly disappeared without a trace. It was as if they had never been here. Only a hand with a doll cover suddenly reached out from the darkness and groped for the border relics in the fragments. It instantly plundered everything and retracted before the big hand angrily slammed down. "Slip away, slip away." The sun which embryo raised its head and roared. Countless poisonous flames condensed into 3 sun-like backlights that appeared behind it. It crazily scattered a large number of destructive rays in a certain direction in the distance. The rays instantly crossed a long distance and came to the sky above the kitten paradise. They turned into a rainstorm of death and fell from the sky. A rainbow suddenly rose from the castle of the paradise and shrouded the sky above the paradise. It took the angry attack of the sun, which embryo. Then the kitten's smug laughter came. "We've been neighbors for so many years, and you're still so enthusiastic before you leave. How can I accept this?" The kitten held a cigarette in its mouth and waved at the furious sun, which embryo. "Then I'll go first. Take care of yourself." Along with the cold sound of a pipa, an ox cart drove into the park at the last moment. Then the gate of the paradise closed with a bang. Then there was an earth-shattering roar. The huge paradise shook violently. It jumped on the spot and rose an insignificant 3 inches. Then it fell again. And in this short gap, an unbelievably huge corrugated box appeared in the void around it. It actually sealed the entire paradise. As the top fan of the box closed, a huge roll of tape appeared from the void. The seal was completed. Then the corrugated box began to shrink rapidly until finally in the huge hole in the ground. Only a box of less than 2 meters in length, width, and height was left. The logo of yesterday's express appeared on the box. The package service you ordered has been completed. All that was missing was a driver. Outside the bloody hole in the sky, the glimmer of light that had been lingering for a long time suddenly shook. The glimmer of light quickly enlarged, and enlarged. In the end, it turned into a huge pure gold chariot. It bathed in flames like a corona and charged into the hole in the sky. In an instant, it whizzed past the battle between the sun witch Embryo and Yishuaya. It did not pay any attention to it at all, as if there was no one around. It was like a scorching sun moving on its own track, with a tyrannical and biting cold aura. If the sun, which was only an embryo now, then this bright chariot was like the incarnation of the real sun. It was majestic, insufferably arrogant. Level 5 stigmata relic, Helios chariot. No, it should be called the Helios workshop. No one would have thought that this alchemy workshop, which had always been known for being mysterious and cold, would suddenly barge into Yamatai City. Taking advantage of the gap between the two sides, it directly threw out a chain and pulled the Paradise package that weighed hundreds of millions of tons. It rose into the air and broke through the sky again. It would never return. It's leaving just like that. Outside Yamatai City, under the reflection of countless stars, the black bird in the void looked down and saw the kitten waving goodbye on the huge chariot. Forget it. Since you're leaving, then goodbye. The old man looked away indifferently. He raised his huge wings a little and opened a path, allowing the sun-like chariot to escape and disappear into the endless hell. They never saw each other again. Chapter 282. In the shadows, Big Bone panted violently as he stared blankly at the approaching black tide. Like an iron wall that held up the sky, it was already right in front of him. In this hellish environment, staring at death inch by inch, no matter how strong one's mind was, it would be hard to resist the arrival of despair, right? But just as he was about to ignore the dangers lurking outside and plan to escape from his hiding place, he found that the turbulent black tide had stopped. The shrinking Shinua framework regained its stability, and all the power overlapped in this city that was incomparably narrow compared to the original terrifying area. The black tide that retreated was only an inch away from the tip of his nose. Life and death were hanging by a thread. Cold sweat dripped from Big Bone's forehead as he panted violently. Only then did he realize that the screams and ghostly cries outside had disappeared without a trace. Dead silence arrived. Only bursts of thunder and howls could be heard coming from behind the iron-like dark clouds in the sky. The white wolf roared, and heaven and earth shook, but this narrow world regained its peace. In the long and uneasy silence, the survivors looked at each other. "It's over." Big Bone swallowed and looked at his teammate. Tian Minjing hesitated for a moment. "Probably 40. In the end, the number of surviving contestants stopped at this extremely small number and then disappeared. Instead, at the end of the street, in front of the dilapidated palace, a ray of light rose from the ground. The light expanded and extended, turning into an arched corridor, and in it an ancient door opened with a bang, waiting for the survivors to come. The door of victory. Tian Minjing was stunned for a moment, and his voice was a little out of tune. The door of victory is open. The cruel battle royale was finally over. They could finally leave this unending nightmare with their spoils of war. The two of them panted violently, wiped their faces, and tried hard to suppress their fluctuating emotions. They almost couldn't help but hug each other and cry. "Let's go, bring the equipment." Big Bone couldn't wait to carry the bag and patted his teammate's shoulder. In just a few days, two strangers who had never met each other had become trustworthy teammates. It was like a miracle. When we go back and come to the Northeast, I'll treat you to lick iron bars and stewed pork with vermicelli. Don't celebrate too early. Carrying his backpack, Tian Minjing carefully stuck his head out and stared at the dead silent street, but he did not find any obstacles or dangers. He immediately raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Sai, I thought that according to the nature of the organizing committee, they would let us escape into the door while being chased by demons and ghosts. I didn't expect it to be so easy. It's fine as long as we can pass. Let's go, let's go." Big Bone couldn't wait any longer. A contestant like him, who was only here to join in the fun, did not expect to be ranked in the first place. Entering the top 72 was already a pleasant surprise. How could he ask for more? However, when he took a step forward, everything in front of him suddenly changed. This was not some dangerous illusion, because the gate of victory was still open right where it was without any changes or movements. As long as one stepped through it, they would be able to leave this place. But as everything in front of him instantly shed its disguise, he smelled the thick stench of blood that almost suffocated him. The shocking crimson color covered every inch of space on the street. The sewer was already blocked, and the blood that submerged the soles of the feet rippled, constantly washing away the pale and distorted faces and the corpses everywhere. Whether it was the ferocious monsters, the strange ghosts, or the creepy abyssal mutants, at this moment, all the living creatures had fallen apart, brutally chopped into pieces, and thrown on the street, together with Judge Jean, who was dropped by countless contestants. Big Bone was stunned in place. He was shocked by the sea of blood and the mountain of corpses in front of him. He was frozen in the cold, trembling. It was as if a sick grandmother had finally shed her disguise and turned into a hungry wolf. Everything became unbelievable. But in the end, when he finally noticed the figure walking in the blood, he didn't know why, but there was a sense of relief in his heart. He finally understood. The reason why the monsters disappeared. It was because an even more terrifying monster had appeared in front of him. Luo Xian turned her head and seemed to be stunned. "Are there still rats hiding here?" In the dead silence, Big Bone was frozen in place. He looked at her, walking towards him step by step. He should have escaped, or at least resisted, and fought to the death. But he didn't know why. Just looking at that white dress, he felt that his consciousness was about to be torn apart, and he fell into that seemingly gentle smile. He melted into the endless darkness. What is this thing? He closed his eyes and heard the sound of his skull breaking from his teammates' terrified screams. The sound of breaking was heard twice, followed by the dull sound of falling to the ground. Luo Xian raised her hand and wiped away the blood that fell on her face. Finally, for the time being, it has come to an end. She heaved a long sigh, bent down, and struggled to pull out the broken blade from the broken skull. She staggered back a step, as if she had exhausted all her strength. Then she turned her head and asked softly, "Little Amber, where are you going?" In the dead silence, the girl who quietly slipped away from the shadows was frozen in place. After a long time, she slowly turned her head, and her expression twitched, and then twitched again, and finally squeezed out a smile with difficulty. "Sister Xian, long time no see. You've grown taller." Luo Xian tilted her head and looked at her, and suddenly asked, "Do you hate me? I thought that acquaintances would at least say hello when they see each other." Amber's expression froze for a moment, and she was silent, not knowing how to answer. No, it should be said that she didn't know how to explain the disgust that she wanted to hide from the bottom of her heart. Yes, she hated Luo Xian. From the first time she saw her, she hated her. It was the conclusion and discovery that a person with a sinister heart instinctively made when they speculated about other people. Perhaps different people had different viewpoints. When one's heart was filled with pain and curses, everything one saw was darkness and despair. However, when Hoopa saw Luo Xian's smiling face in his most painful moment, he never dared to look her in the eye again. She knew that she hated, no, was afraid of Luo Xian. It was far more than she was afraid of the master craftsman's strictness and brutality. A beast would be wary of a beast from the bottom of her heart, especially when it was a monster that she absolutely couldn't resist or fight against. It was even more so. I'm not hostile. Seeing Luo Xian dragging her katana and walking towards her step by step, Amber subconsciously took a step back and raised her hands nervously. She felt cold sweat seeping out from her back. Luo Xian looked at her in confusion, and her eyes were puzzled. But I do. He saw Hoopo's body stiffen for a moment, then he slowly relaxed, as if she finally understood something. She exhaled the anxious breath in her heart and said to herself, in other words, I have no choice but to do this. No one answered. Luo Xian just smiled and looked at her. So Amber's eyes gradually turned cold. Then she reached out and pulled out a wakizashi that was in her way and casually threw it on the ground. Then her right hand held the handle of the katana at her waist. The blazing breath was like a pure white cloud that rose from the thin blood mist and covered her face. Only a pair of pitch-black eyes were left. Silent like a piece of iron, there was no longer any hesitation. Please come at me. Then Luo Xian came over. 1 step, 2 steps. Hoopo's fingers twitched for a moment, but then they relaxed again. Then, facing the bone-piercing chill, Luo Xian took a 3rd step and paused for a moment. With the 4th step, she finally stepped into the range of the katana's reach. No, distance was meaningless to Hoopa to begin with. Her soul ability could perfectly correct the blade difference. Within 10 meters, there was no such thing as the best distance and the limit of strength. Even if there was only a gap, it was enough for her to calmly swing her sword. But she didn't move. Her 5 fingers on the hilt clenched several times, but they relaxed again, helplessly. She couldn't find any gap. She was lost in the tidal wave of qi around Luo Xian. Cold sweat dripped from her forehead, and she was drenched in sweat. She wasn't confident. Facing that gentle smile, she didn't have the courage to draw her sword. She just stopped herself from trembling and used all her strength. She stiffened on the spot until the two of them brushed past each other. In the dead silence, Amber lowered her eyes, and her hand tiredly loosened from the hilt. She sighed softly. She expressed her gratitude from the bottom of her heart. Thank you. Isn't this what a senior sister should do? Luo Xian looked back at her and continued forward. A line of blood suddenly appeared on the back of Amber's fair neck. Following that, along with the scarlet diagonal line, her neck smoothly tilted to the side. Blood spurted out. Was it so beautiful to behead someone in a row? Amidst the drowsiness of weightlessness, Amber closed her eyes. It was really a complete loss. In the dead silence of the venue, everyone quietly stared at this brutal massacre. They suppressed the sound of their breaths, as if they were watching a horror movie and could empathize with the scene. On the big screen, the number of contestants continued to slide down steadily. In the end, there were only 13 contestants left. Then it became 12. 11, the deaths continued. As Luo Xian moved forward, they fell in front of each opponent equally and mercifully. In the end, no one could be found. Luo Xian returned to the street, took out a white apron from her pocket, and changed into a gray smock. She picked up a mop and a broom and slowly cleaned up the tragic scene. She was as skilled as a maid who came out of nowhere. She dragged the corpses over and piled them in one place. She opened up the sewer and drained the blood. Finally, she carefully swept the broken remains and flesh together, shoveled them into a dustpan, and dumped them into the trash can. Finally, she washed them with water. After cleaning the floor, she wiped the stained glass, hung the bloodstains on the wall, watered the plants, and put the mop and broom back in the alley. The maid's work was done beautifully. She moved a chair and sat in front of the victory door that led to the ending, quietly waiting for the next visitor. So slow. That guy. She rested her chin on her palm and patiently stared at the end of the street. Could he have died in some unknown place? Was his luck that good? The melancholy Luo Xian sighed softly. She really couldn't be happy. Chapter 283. Oh my God, am I going to die? Huaishir opened his eyes from the intense pain and gasped for breath. He felt an indescribable thirst and pain. His sage mark felt like it was about to shatter. He was short on origin substance, and his vision was dark. Then, a translucent shadow floated over from the side. It was like a shadow condensed from ashes. A pair of dim eyes quietly stared at him, expressionless. Huaishir was so scared that he almost jumped up from the ground. That is, if he could still jump up. Very quickly, the gray shadow dissipated, forming the red glove's blank face. Huaishir gasped for breath for a long time, coughing violently. How did you become like that? Like what? The red glove looked at him, puzzled. I haven't changed at all. Bullshit, you obviously. Huaishir hadn't finished speaking when the red glove in front of him changed again. This time, he finally discovered that the red glove wasn't the only one that had changed. He had changed as well. After that mysterious copper mirror had merged with his soul, his eyes seemed to have changed. When he focused, he could easily see through the surface of things. Reflect the essence. However, the origin substance that he had managed to recover with great difficulty was sucked dry again after a few glances. And just by taking a quick glance, he saw cracks in his bones, as well as countless tiny things that looked like worms swimming about. They were like parasites residing in his blood. He lowered his head and looked at his miserable upper body. His left leg had been smashed to the edge by the large, rotting hand and then shattered into several pieces. His body was covered in countless wounds, and he had almost died on the spot. The most serious injuries were the places where the maggots had bitten him. Dark gray poison wrapped around the wounds, and even his own poison resistance couldn't dispel it. Through the translucent flesh, he could see the dense group of parasites sprouting in the wounds, and his own sage mark, which was dimly operating. No matter how he looked at it, he looked like he was about to die. If the red glove hadn't sensed that he was in danger and rushed over in time to take over the injured white horse and make emergency treatment, he probably would have left in shock. Suck. Red Gloves opened the basket beside him, grabbed a handful of leaves, and stuffed them into Huaishir's hand. Unlike Huaishir, who had been severely injured by the sun, witch embryo, and had almost died for nothing, the Red Gloves seemed to have gained a lot. The basket on his back was already filled to the brim with various plants that Huaishir did not recognize. Some of them were even full of vitality, which surprised him. Among them, there were about 40 types of precious abyssal plants that were full of vitality. The others were also types that Huaishir had never seen before. They were all branches, leaves, and fruits that had been plucked off. Huaishir simply didn't pay attention to them. He grabbed a handful and sucked them all in one breath. After eating half a basket, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Beside him, the Red Gloves had found a crucible from somewhere, and there was already a boiling sound. "What's that?" Huaishir asked. "It's the butterfly incense from India. I found some tobacco leaves and spices there and tried to make some." As Red Glove spoke, his hands did not stop moving. He poured the sticky glue in the small crucible into a simple filter. In the end, the residue in the filter quickly turned into a gray powder. The powder was mixed into the dried tobacco leaves and mixed evenly. Then, he poured in the juice extracted from the border plants, mixed it, and roughly squeezed into a sharp cone shape. A stick of incense was ready. This was the application of spices in alchemy. It was not in the field of metalworking that Huaishur specialized in. However, he could also see that the tools were too crude and the technique was not good. After wasting a lot of materials, the medicinal effect would not be too good. But it was enough. Metal repaired the body, and incense healed the soul. Silver blood medicine could heal wounds, and the incense produced by alchemy was mostly used to restore origin substances. Unfortunately, apart from a small amount of millennium incense, most incense could not produce origin substances out of thin air. They could only forcefully produce origin substances by stimulating the soul. It was like using adrenaline to get rid of sleepiness. Using too much of it was harmful. However, the situation was critical, so he could only make do. A pale white alchemy flame appeared on Huaishur's fingertips and fell on the top of the incense. In an instant, the white flames began to burn wildly. After swallowing up the entire incense, it was completely burned into dust that could no longer be used. What replaced it was a wisp of purified sky blue smoke that entered Huaishur's nose. His face was visibly flushed, and large amounts of origin substance appeared in his empty soul, dispelling the drowsiness. After a rough estimate, he found that his mana bar had been filled by more than half, but his limit had been reduced by a bit. However, Huaishur's origin substance was at least 3 times more than other origin substances of the same tier. Considering the urgency of the situation, a bit less wouldn't be a big deal. At worst, he could just go back and meditate a few more times and recuperate for a while to make up for it. After crawling back from the brink of sudden death, Huaishur gasped for breath and wiped the sweat off his forehead. The parasite needs to be removed. This was the real problem. He thought for a moment, pulled out the sacrificial knife and the sword of virtue, and handed them to the Red Glove. "I'll command you'll be the main knife. The small hammer will scratch the seam, and the big hammer will do it. Is there a problem?" The Red Glove silently took the knife and sword, waiting for his command. Sometimes, Huaishur would suspect that the Red Glove was still alive. After being given memories, the changes in the army's ghosts were like heaven and earth. They were so agile that it was as if the dead had been reborn. However, a dead person was dead, and it was impossible for them to be reborn. In front of him was only a sacred mark that carried the records of the dead. At best, it was like a moving tombstone. This was only the result of the fusion of the most basic record fragment and the sacred mark. If the kingdom of heaven still existed, the result of the fusion with a high-grade sacred mark, would it really be no different from the rebirth of the dead? Because of this, he could understand more and more that the fall of the kingdom of heaven was not without reason. Who would want to become someone else's puppet after death? This was even more objectionable than necromancers playing with corpses. This was probably not the only sin that the lunatic creators of the utopia had committed back then. The future division and collective consolidation had probably been foreshadowed a long time ago. Thinking of this, Huaishur couldn't help but sigh. He heard the sound of thunder behind the dark clouds in the sky. The gods were fighting. But no matter who won, it had nothing to do with a small, insignificant person like him. Although this was the case, in the end, it was most likely that the Ingzhou lineage would suffer a huge loss, right? Regardless of the size of the lineage, the degree of internal unity would be enough to know the result. Until now, he still didn't understand how useless the Yingzhou lineage was. How could there be so much internal strife? Even if the Gong family and the Wu family had been fighting for thousands of years, and even if they had a tradition of internal strife, they couldn't even work together under such strong external pressure. Now, even a fifth-level sacred mark could be plucked by the Dongxia lineage. What a joke! That was a fifth-level sacred mark. It was different from the low-level sacred marks that could be created in batches with alchemy and bought with money. A fourth-level sacred mark was a true miracle of the world. It was a walking nuclear weapon that needed to be reported when entering and exiting the country. It was a human-shaped destructive cedar that would attract the attention of the Astronomical Society just by approaching the country's border. A demigod in the human world. How many fifth-level sacred marks were there in Yingzhou? 1, 2. Even if they were all idiots, there was no need for them to be so stupid, right? What were they thinking? But what did this have to do with him, a traitor in the Astronomical Society? While his mind was full of thoughts, Huaishur had already pointed out a few parasites that had begun to gnaw on his sacred mark with the clairvoyance hack that he had just obtained. The red glove drew his sword and slashed down. The sword of virtue accurately stabbed a wound. Then, with a flick of the broken blade, a worm was pulled out. The worm looked like an earthworm. Once it was pulled out, it hissed. But immediately, the sacrificial knife cut down and sucked its blood, causing it to shrivel into ashes. Even if it was entangled in the bone and couldn't be pulled out after the blade of the sword cut the wound, the sacrificial knife directly stabbed in. Along with Huaishur's blood, the worm was directly sucked dry. The moment it lost its life, it was digested by the mountain ghost's sacred mark. With the help of the operation, the sacred mark that was difficult to operate instantly became smooth. Immediately, thousands of strands of source substance were separated from the body and began to strangle the foreign body. After continuous transformation, the source substance was endowed with the characteristics of a parasitic vine. It directly parasitized the parasites. In the end, Huaishur couldn't tell who was more ruthless and who was more evil. The red glove's movements were very fast. Within a few minutes, the old wound was healed. The numbness gradually faded, and it was replaced by bursts of pain of flesh and blood tearing. This was a small matter. First, the bone was set, then the silver blood potion was applied to seal the wound. Finally, the mountain ghost hugged a tree and sucked it madly. The empty HP bar was recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. As for the poison that was entangled in his body, Huaishur thought for a moment and simply took out the pike of compassion, stabbing it twice at the place where the poison had infected. After the blue crown dragon's decay poison had degraded most of the poison and forced it to expire, the rest was within the scope of Huaishur's treatment. As for the blue crown dragon's poison, he had the crow's antidote, so it wasn't a problem. After one round of playing with poison, Huaishur basically recovered from his weakened state. This was the good thing about the mountain ghost. Basically, as long as it didn't die on the spot, it could always be pulled back. After recovering a little, Huaishur's death-seeking heart began to stir again. After hesitating, he thought for a moment and said to the red glove, "Stab me." The red glove didn't say anything. He raised the sacrificial knife and stabbed at Huaishur's heart. The speed of the movement and the fierceness of the attack were simply outrageous. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.